And before we do that, we're going to welcome on the stage Ingmar Rentzhog, the CEO and founder of We Don't Have Time, and Johan Falk, the co-founder and... the co-founder of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah.
And I have a question to you, the audience, as an introduction to this segment. And that is, how big chances do you think we have that we will ever reach the emission targets in the Paris Agreement on a scale between 0 to 100%? Right now it seems to 0 because this doesn't work. But we do this manually. So if you think 0%, raise your hand. We have some 0% here. And we also have a technology that are working. So if you think 25%, raise your hand. We have some more hands, and 50%. Some hands. 75. 100%. No one was 100.
Oh, there's one. There's one up there, yeah.
Okay. I think you have been here previous days, maybe.
Yeah, you've been building up to 100% over the last few days. Okay.
That's great. We also have asked this question to the live audience we have. We have 58% are very pessimistic. They think between 0 to 25%. So most people, when I ask this question, they are negative. And I don't agree on that. My belief is that we're going to make this 100%. I'm totally sure about that. And it's not just a vision. I think the vision is important, because if we don't believe in that this is solvable, it's very hard to do it. If you don't believe that you will win the race, you're probably not going to win the race. You need to have that mentality. But it's not just a mentality that we believe in something impossible. We believe in it because it's so many reasons. And the number one reason I have is the number of people engaged in climate solutions. When we started our global broadcast 5 years ago from We Don't Have Time, we were super happy. We had 10,000 viewers watching us live. And when we did the same last year on Earth Day, we had 5 million viewers. And this Earth Day, we had 13 million viewers. And so far on this event, we had over 10 million viewers since we started on Tuesday. So it's a lot of people engaged in climate solutions. But it's not just the number of people, it's also the business community. They want to act on this. United Nations have an initiative called Race to Zero. And companies, investors and citizens can join this initiative if they want to go fossil-free. And today it's so many companies representing these initiatives, so together they make up to more than 50% of the global GDP. More than 50% of the whole economy wants to go fossil-free. But it's a big but. And that is not if we're going to reach the targets. The big but is, are we going to do it on time? And that is what We Don't Have Time is all about. We need to speed up this change. And we have built a tool for that, but we need your help to use this tool. And this is important. The thing we can all of us do in order to help us win this race is to speed up change, accelerate change. So when you see someone doing something great for the climate, a leader, a company, or a neighbor, or anyone, you could give them a climate love on We Don't Have Time platform so that they will get rewarded. And when you see someone lagging behind, doing things slowly or doing something stupid, destroying our planet, you could give them climate warning. A lot of people deserve climate warning. But do you know what? 70% on our platform is actually climate love. So a lot more people deserve reward. And you're going to see that here today. And I'm also very proud of working with Exponential Roadmap as our main partner for those event series. And what is Exponential Roadmap doing, Johan?
Thank you, Ingmar. I'm absolutely with you. Failure is not an option. What we do is we bring together the leading transformers and disruptors taking action in line with the 1.5 ambition. And we started with a few organizations and companies a couple of years ago, and now we have companies representing $1,000 billion in revenues, all committed to halve emissions by 2030 towards net zero. Their own emissions, but also in their value chain, but also actually influencing the global net zero beyond their own operation. And that is what we call the carbon law. The carbon law is about halving emissions every decade, and it was formulated by Johan Rockström, our chairman, together with us, inspired by the Moore's law about four years ago. And that is now the basis for the UN Race to Zero. It's the basis for the US goals, for the European goals. So that also shows that it's possible to scale big ideas really fast. But now it's all about action. We are far beyond the pledges. And that is the reason why we developed the business playbook, the 1.5 supply chain leaders, the SME Climate Hub. So all of these are examples of exponential action projects where we can basically share the best practice on a global level to scale out much faster. The exponential roadmap basically states that solutions exist to halve emissions by 2030 in all sectors. And we talked about energy, we talked about transport yesterday, and today it's about food and land. We'll focus on the 5 big solutions. It's about shifting to plant-based, sustainable food. It's about cutting food waste. It's about shifting to regenerative agriculture. And it's about stopping deforestation and destruction of nature. So we're very excited to have some of the leaders focusing on how can we accelerate the scaling of these solutions. Yeah. Back to you, Nick.
Thanks a lot, Johan, and thanks a lot, Ingmar.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're here to talk about how to reduce our food print. People talk about footprints. We can talk about food print, can't we? So I'm delighted to welcome 2 remarkable people to the stage who are key members of the EAT Lancet Commission. The Lancet, by the way, is a British medical journal, global medical journal. There's Dr. Gunhild Stordalen, who's founder and executive chair of EAT, which is the science-based global platform for food system transformation. And Professor Johan Rockström, chair of the EAT Advisory Board, the EAT Lancet co-chair and commissioner, and also director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. In 2019, the Commission launched a landmark report on what is needed to deliver a healthy diet to around 8 billion people, rising to maybe 10 billion by 2050, but without trashing our planet. Gunhild and Johan are with us here to launch a new phase of the Commission. But before we do this, can you give us some headline findings of the report? So let's join each other on this sofa. Please. Nice to meet you. Hi. Again, actually.
Thanks for having me.
Good, yeah. So wonderful to have you both here with us. This report from 2019 was really big. I mean, the media coverage was absolutely huge, if that's any barometer of success. But tell us a little bit about it. I don't know, maybe Gunhild, you'd like to start first. Some headline findings from this 2019 report.
I'm happy to do so, and great to be here.
Yep.
I just need to clarify, I'm not part of the first Eat Lancet Commission, neither the second one, but I'm the founder and executive chair of Eat Foundation.
Thank you very much for clearing that up, right? We'd probably have loads of bad social media if we didn't do that.
But she's the visionary behind the Lancet.
She's the visionary behind it, right? So we have the visionary and we have the co-commissioner, so there we go.
Then she lets us scientists do the heavy lifting and the hard work.
Exactly. Posing the question, which was actually, the first report, Eat Lancet 1, was actually the answer to the question that led Johan and myself to co-fund EAT in 2013. And it was basically, is it possible to feed close to 10 billion people enough healthy food within safe planetary boundaries or without wrecking our planets? And it was actually a landmark report, a really disruptive piece of work, because it was the first time ever scientists across health, climate, agriculture, nutrition came together and looked into both the health and the environmental impacts of our food systems. And Johan will speak to the planetary boundaries and the modeling work, but on the health and nutrition side of things, the most important contribution of the Commission was actually the planetary health diet, which basically was about defining a universal healthy reference diet. Does not mean that the Commission came up with a universal diet that everybody has to eat. It's really about a framework that has to be translated into different regions and countries and local communities. And it's also not a vegan or vegetarian diet. It's a flexitarian diet. So still room for meats and other animal proteins, but it's basically a plant-rich, healthy whole food diets, minimal amounts of processed, ultra-processed foods and sugar, but very rich in all the good stuff. So nuts, fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, etc. And it's also very flexible, so again, has to be translated, and also diversity is a key part of that diet, which actually is pretty close to the Mediterranean diets and also what our grandparents used to eat, I guess.
Yeah, interesting. Johan, some headline figures from this report as well, from your perspective.
No, it was a real scientific breakthrough, because we have, had for decades the unequivocal evidence that the food system is the single largest threat to the stability of the planet. But we've never really put the quantitative safe space for a sustainable food system in the world. So the Eat Lancet Commission was the first attempt of translating the planetary boundaries to identify what's the share of responsibility for the food system. And this is fundamental, because we know that the number one driver behind loss of biodiversity is how we produce food. Food consumes roughly 70% of all the fresh water that we withdraw from our rivers. It's the number one cause for eutrophication. Everyone living in this part of the world knows about the anoxic, oxygen-free Baltic. You had Isabella Lövin here just now, kind of a champion for the ocean. It's the food system threatening this. Land systems are transformed. The climate system, 25% of greenhouse gas emissions are originating from all the gases coming from our food system. So to put it simple, we have no safe landing on a stable climate nor a livable planet without a food system transformation. We will not hold the 1.5 degrees Celsius landing zone on climate without a food system transformation. So the Eat Lancet Commission defined quantitatively what's a safe space for food, and then we combined that with the universal planetary health diet and ran the first set of scenarios, just like the IPCC does, to explore what are the pathway, what are the choices we can make to see if it's possible to feed 10 billion people with healthy diets within planetary boundaries. And not surprisingly, what the results show is that a business as usual pathway will crash the planet. But on the other hand, if we invest in healthy diets, just healthy diets alone, just eating healthily, will be the single largest contributor to start moving back into the safe space. The trick is, will that be enough? And the conclusion is no. We also need to invest in various forms of sustainable regenerative agricultural practices, and we mapped those. Would that be enough? Healthy food and sustainable production systems? The answer was no, not even that is enough. We also need to radically reduce food waste. But the interesting thing is, if we do all that together, reduce food waste, invest in regenerative agricultural practices, and start eating the flexitarian diet, we actually move in within the safe space on climate, on biodiversity, on fresh water, on nitrogen, on phosphorus, and on land. So quite an exciting opportunity, which is why we see, across policy around the world, that we're today recognizing that our safe journey to the future is an energy transformation and a food transformation. These are the two highest items of exponential. I mean, you had Johan Falk just here on the exponential roadmap on climate. Well, the second one is on food.
Yeah. So food and energy, rest is footnotes to be.
Yeah, exactly.
But you forgot one thing, Johan. Not only can we stay within a safe operating space for humanity, if we do those 3 shifts, but we can also save at least 11 million lives every year, and obviously improve the health and well-being of hundreds of millions, if not billions more. And on the health side, obviously food has become the biggest killer in the world, the biggest driver and risk factor for premature mortality and ill health. So just shifting to healthy diets can save immense amount of money, not at least in the health, over the healthcare budgets around the world.
Okay. If we just pause there 2 seconds.
Yeah, okay.
Because just to
we can
say,
go on for.
No, but look here. 2 different independent studies show that we are prematurely losing 10 million lives per year because of unhealthy food. But remember that the pandemic, the crisis that everyone has recognized as being a global crisis of urgent action and so much devastation, has today killed much fewer people per year. I mean, we're up at 15 million on aggregate over 2 years. The food system kills 10 million per year and has been doing so for decades. So just to give the orders of magnitude, and we're not acting.
Well, this is the thing I was coming to, really, because, I mean, human beings are absolutely wonderful when there's an absolute massive crisis in their face. We're fantastic at responding, right? I mean, if there's an angry dog coming down the stairs right now, sort of slaving with big teeth, we'll react immediately, won't we? Somebody will kick it, or we'll run in the opposite direction, but we'll do something, yeah? But if they say an angry dog is coming in 2 weeks, it's like, well, let's not worry about that, I won't be here. So, how many reports does it need? I mean, the IPCC on Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has been dishing out reports, wonderful reports, since, 1989 or something like that. We've got the governments down the road for Stockholm +50 for 2 days. We've got the climate COP coming up in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Do you see any internalizing within government policies of the 2019 Eat Lancet report? Do you see any signatures of action?
Well, to start with, last September, we had the first ever UN Food Systems Summit. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, convened all his member states and all stakeholders around an action agenda, really inspired and informed by the Eat Lancet report. Several countries around the world have now updated their national dietary guidelines, for example, Denmark and Finland, and more than 15 big cities around the world, including Lima, New York, Tokyo, Barcelona, have now committed to implement the Eat Lancet targets by 2030. And the EU's Farm to Fork strategy, which is, at least in my view, the most promising that is happening in the policy space, is also very inspired and reflecting the framework from the first report. So I would say that, yes, things are happening, but we are obviously far from where we have to be. We are still not bending the curves. We are still obviously escalating in the wrong direction, away from what a future worth having for humanity looks like, and also in a full collision course with nature. So it's not happening fast enough. And obviously this multiple interconnected crisis perfect storm we are in the midst of, with climate and nature crisis escalating, with the unprecedented pandemic we've just been through, and now the terrible war against Ukraine. I mean, all this are screaming to us that we are now in what the Secretary General termed code red for humanity. And what's wrong with our food system sits at the very heart of it. So we really need to now, well, mobilize this crisis mode to actually not only do more band-aid solutions and more of the kind of the short-term measures, but really use this to pivot into the transformative journey that we really have to embark on.
And perhaps the other thing about this topic is that it actually does really speak to ordinary people as well. I mean, people can understand the food story, right? It's a bit hard for them.
Very tangible.
Yeah, it's hard for them to understand the challenges, say, facing a truck company like Scania to electrify their... That seems quite remote from your daily life, right? Or, you know, the big climate issues that are so huge in people's understanding. But food is that nexus, isn't it? Food and land and biodiversity, and it's that linkages and the idea of the human health as well really can connect people.
And it's not only that, and that was one of the advancements. And of course, we have to be a bit self-critical in the scientific community. We have never really worked together between the sustainability community, the agriculture community, and the health community. So this is the first time where we can show that a very powerful lever to solve sustainability problems is health. And that you can actually go via health, because just as you say, Nick, health connects to your personal everyday life. Everyone wants to have a healthy life. You want to have a long life. You want to have a happy life. And oh my God, I eat, I get happier and healthier, and I contribute to save the planet. It's kind of a nice story. But we in the climate science have not really entered that space properly. And so I think there is... you know, we've come late to that inside of that work, but we've made major advancements now. And if you enter, you know, the space of agriculture or biodiversity or climate, you'll see much more on equity, health, peace, security. It's quite interesting. I mean, at the World Economic Forum, the food crisis was at the center stage, despite the fact that Ukraine war and finance was, of course, the top items, but also recognition that food and climate are no longer environmental issues. These are really about societal stability. And that is a threat. It's like your dog coming. That's you know,
the dog's here. The dog is here.
The dog is here and embarking quite loudly.
But I think also the health argument is an important one, because it's not only is it a universal argument that everyone understands, but it's also here and now. We are still struggling, although we are in the midst of now extreme weather events and really feeling climate change getting closer and closer by the day. It's still like something that is pushed to the side because we have more urgent crises like Ukraine. Everybody's talking about it, but we really need to now connect this, and also seeing food as the immense opportunity space it really offers, because you can deliver on multiple objectives at the same time: better health, less healthcare costs, better social equity and justice, a stable and safe environment, and all of this is possible to achieve if we take the big picture approach and really let the science guide us.
And of course, we're living in a world now with so many people that we can't just say, okay, this land is dead, we can move on. I mean, there's still a few places left, some parts of Africa, where you can move on. But we can't move on. We've got to make the best of what we have, right? We have to make it work here and now on the very soil. Well, we're not standing on soil, it's a stage actually, but on the very foundation that we're standing on, right? Because the land, the soils, they are the foundation of actually our entire existence, and people don't often recognize it, the atmosphere and the land and soil, and some things in between. But without them, we don't exist.
No, you know, that's something that unfortunately is sinking in much too slowly. But we have all the evidence showing that, for our modern civilizational journey, which is roughly 150 years, I mean, since we started industrialization in the mid of the 18th century, up until just even in the 1980s, early 1980s, you could still argue that we were, a relatively small world on a big planet where there was land where you could expand. You could still fish the oceans without having collapse. You could still even load the atmosphere with more greenhouse gases without having massive impacts of heat waves and droughts and floods. So even though it was unsustainable, the resilience in the system, the redundancy, the ability to cope was so large that we didn't really feel the pain. So the whole GDP growth idea was a massive planetary subsidy that we could just surf along, at least the minority of us rich in the world. But then, roughly 1990, we hit the wall. And we hit the first wall, which is that agriculture, which has just been feeding humanity by expanding 2% per year, of course yields as well increasing, but it was an expansion journey, had to halt. Why? Because we've transformed 50% of the Earth's surface into agriculture, and the other 50% is the part that is giving us pollination, rainfall, carbon sequestration, element cycling, and all the ability to cope and regenerate all our organic waste. So now we have scientific evidence to say, dear friends, it's finished. We can no longer just go on destroying intact nature as a path to feed ourselves. We now have to have investments into rebuilding, but at the same time recognizing that we still have a challenge of 7.8, soon to be 9, potentially 10 billion co-citizens, of which 1 billion are absolute malnourished and 3 billion are lacking, basically go to bed every night not being sure of having food. So, it's a massive challenge, but one has to recognize these boundaries, that they're real. They're real now.
But what Johan is saying here is so important, because not only food systems have to go from being the single largest emitter, accounting for up to 1/3 of the global emissions, to actually become net carbon sinks by 2050, so absorbing and storing massive amounts of carbon, not at least in the soil, but it also has to go to restore biodiversity, and we need to produce more food on the same area of land we have today. And the scary thing here is that this is not in the climate negotiations. It's not on the table of the negotiators. No country in the world basically has the full food systems approach in their national climate plans, although it's 1/3 of the climate problem and has to become a solution. So this just shows the magnitude of what we are up against and why we urgently need to kind of shout this out and spread the message and push for national governments and obviously international organizations to start really taking this in and acting on it, and hence why we are here with Eat-Lancet 2.
So we're going to come in 2 seconds to something on the launch of the second report. But just to say, I get a sense from the Egyptians who will be hosting the next climate conference in Sharm el-Sheikh that food will be very much on the agenda. I've seen the climate champion for Egypt already speaking out on this, and that would be a good thing.
Well, this is, and Johan, please fill me in here, but the latest I heard is that the food day, or not the food day, because that is too broad and holistic, unfortunately, to systems approach is very difficult. It was an agriculture and food security day that has been planned. As far as I understand, this is no longer on the table.
Okay, so we have to do some lobbying then.
We need to do some urgent lobbying. In COP26, or at COP26 in Glasgow, food was discussed, but it was not inside the room of the negotiators. And this obviously, I mean, we are running out of time. That's the fact. And we urgently need to get this in as part of the formal negotiations, and countries need to start implementing this into their national climate plans, and also not only mitigation but also adaptation. But Johan, you might have more intel to share here.
Yeah, I'd have to be very brief here because I think the clock is ticking. It says 1 minute 13 seconds, the end of our section.
But I agree with this. Some urgent lobbying is required, but I think we're in a very good position, unfortunately, because the climate impacts on food security, both in the Horn of Africa, India, and impacting on the global food markets is so apparent today. You just saw the front page on The Economist on the global food crisis. So yes, I think it's something that we will see in Sharm el-Sheikh, and we need to push for it.
Yeah, super. Right, so we're having a little launch right now. We don't have a big bell and we don't have champagne, corks popping all over the room, but tell us a new phase of this report, the second one. Why do we need it? Sounded pretty obvious. I think you've told me why we need it, but why do we need it? When's it happening? When will you complete it?
I will start and you will finish, Johan. The Food System Summit was a massive success in many ways. More than 140 countries have now started working on national pathways to healthy, sustainable and equitable food systems by 2030. But we still don't have consensus. We still don't have a 1.5 degree equivalent for food to rally the world behind, like we have for climate. And we don't have consensus on the targets we have on the planetary health diets. And there are also many knowledge gaps that still must be filled. And the social justice and equity dimension is one. And obviously, constituencies, stakeholders are screaming for targets. They want to have something to navigate towards. So this is really an effort to contribute to some of these gaps, but the scientists can continue.
Yeah, no, but I'll really keep an academic hat on, because I think one has to. I mean, I totally agree with you, as you know, Nick, that things go too slowly, and 6 IPCC assessments, we should have acted. We knew we had the evidence 30 years ago, etc. But we also know that if it hadn't been for the IPCC, if it hadn't been for this persistent, patient update every 5th year of the scientific evidence, we would not have had 1.5. We would not have had any action in the world. We would not have had 100 countries with net zero pathway. We would not even talk about a carbon budget. What we're trying to do is basically learn from that, but speed up, and to do a scientific update of what you could call like an IPCC for food, and to update, because the science is advancing so fast. What does science say today of defining a planetary health diet? What is the latest science on all the planetary boundaries? And can we invite, which we will do, a much broader group of scientific groups around the world to run scenario pathways of a safe landing for the food system? Because in the first round, we just did it with one model. What we'll also do in this round is focus much more strongly on equity and justice. And we will do something that we also missed last time, which is to take the science on a universal definition of a healthy, sustainable diet and apply it in different cultures of diets in the world. So we can see how does it match with a South Asian, an African, a European, a Latin American diet. Because that was one of the critiques that came up in the first round.
Right.
And this will be, so we're kind of pushing the boundaries on the science, but also updating the science. And personally, I think that is it's the floor to stand on for our ability to do all the action that we need.
And the final thing that is important to mention is that, and also some of the learnings from the first report, is that, we are running out of time. We don't have another 3 years to wait while we're waiting for the science. So in parallel with the scientific work of the commissioners, we will do extensive stakeholders consultations as inclusive as possible, but without obviously jeopardizing the integrity and scientific independence of the Commission. But it's so important to start socializing the idea and the framework and kind of the concept, and also inviting stakeholders to really provide inputs to help sharpen the questions.
You can see how stressful it is to work with Gunhild.
We are running out of time. We don't have time. Isn't that why we're here? Yeah.
And we don't have time anymore for this fascinating discussion, which could go on for a very long time, because it is very interesting. Gunhild, thank you so much for being here. Johan, for being here too. Johan, I need to call you up on the stage for a keynote. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
So I'm not going to introduce Johan Rockström again for his keynote, because that would be excessive. I'm just going to ask you to come on down and stare into this camera and please deliver your keynote. Thank you.
Good. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's happening now is that you'll get a first little preview on a breakthrough initiative that Michael Wolosin will be presenting from Conservation International. It's a really important work that we at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research are collaborating with Conservation International, which is to fill a major gap in our pathways towards a safe landing on climate, which actually draws very much on the discussion we just had on the Eat Lancet Commission. So we know, and you're all fully aware of this, that there is no safe climate landing. We will not be able to make 1.5 degrees Celsius unless we also secure all the carbon sinks and stocks in nature. This is absolutely fundamental. In fact, over the 100 IPCC climate models that are run in the IPCC to give us the global carbon budget of roughly 400 billion tons of carbon dioxide remaining for a safe landing, the carbon budget that translates to what Johan Falk talked about here earlier, the carbon law, you know, cutting emissions by half every decade to net zero world economy by 2050, that orderly safe landing is actually predefined by assumptions in the models that three things will happen at the same time. Number one is that we'll have a food system transition. So food will go from the single largest emitter, 12.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year today, into becoming the single largest sink in the economy, roughly 10 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year. The second assumption is that we'll be starting to scale different forms of negative emission technologies up to 10 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year. Let's put that aside for the moment because this initiative is filling the gap on nature. And the third assumption is that intact nature, the 50% on terrestrial ecosystems that we have so far not transformed into agriculture, cities and infrastructure will remain intact and continue to absorb, can you imagine, in the order of 25% of our fossil fuel emissions coming from burning of coal, oil and natural gas. And the other 25% is in the ocean. So we have buckets of carbon that are assumed in the models to stay intact over the next 100 years. 25% 10 gigatons in the ocean, 25% 10 gigatons on land, and the 10 gigatons on managed lands, forestry and agriculture. For these, we don't have a guiding principle. We don't have markets. We don't have regulatory means. We're just building them into the analytics, and then we give all the policy sectors the 400 gigatons in the carbon budget for fossil fuel phase-out, which has given us really good things. Science-Based Target Initiative, milestones for net zero, and Fit for 55. Sweden has its 55% aligned with the European Union, etc. So all this is in place. Now we need the carbon law for nature, and we need to have the pathway for nature. And that is what Mike will be sharing with you. The first preview of the analytics behind that new nature climate solution roadmap, the carbon law for nature. Why do we do this? Well, it's because every actor, a business, a city, company, nation, can then get that as a quantitative, measurable and reporting reference point, which then we hope will be a possibility of ramping up the voluntary carbon markets in the world. Because if you know what you're measuring, and if you know what you can invest in, and if you know how much you need to deliver on, that can become a tradable unit across markets in the world, just as we're doing on carbon for fossil fuels. So hopefully this would be a way of integrating climate and nature into one framework. And again, it's something that we really need and that we're lacking. So with that, back to you, and I guess Michael is with us somewhere.
I think Michael may be with us, yeah. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah. Thank you for framing that. It would have been a nightmare for me to do that, so what a great relief that you did that for me.
Thanks.
So let's go to our next keynote. Now let me bring in Michael Wolosin, who leads Conservation International's design and delivery of its exponential roadmap for natural climate solutions. Michael, are you with us? Can I see you?
I am with you.
Oh,
Hello.
you're with it by the magic of Zoom. Okay.
By the magic of Zoom. Thank you so much.
Great. Lovely to see you. You have the floor.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Johan, for the keynote introduction and for your excitement and engagement on our Natural Climate Solutions Exponential Roadmap. So 50 years ago in Stockholm, a process of visioning and organizing the global community for a healthier planet began. Today, as many of us gather again in Stockholm, I wish I were there with you, of course, we recommit ourselves to that future of a healthy environment. Earlier today, Secretary General Antonio Guterres reminded us that our global well-being is in jeopardy because we have not kept our promises on the environment, and that our environmental footprint has become unbearably heavy. Most of that footprint, as we've discussed, has been in food. Nowhere is this footprint more evident than the land sector itself. We currently use about 30% of ice-free land in the world to feed livestock. We use another 20% approximately for harvesting trees at different levels of intensity, and another approximately 10% for growing food for humans. This is not just a land footprint, it's also an emissions and climate footprint. 6.5 gigatons of climate emissions annually from agriculture, and another 6 gigatons, almost the same amount of emissions, are coming from ecosystem destruction, largely due to agriculture expansion. We are hereby introducing a sneak peek, a preview of our exponential roadmap for natural climate solutions. We'll be releasing the full report at Climate Week in New York in September. I'm excited to give you a preview with Johan today of this NCS exponential roadmap. The first important piece of our exponential roadmap for natural climate solutions is this carbon law for nature. This is the destination that we all need to be reaching for. It is a new carbon law component, equivalent and complementary to the carbon law for fossil and industry. Right now, Johan mentioned we're at about 12.5 gigatons of annual emissions. 1/4 of annual emissions are coming from managed lands and from anthropogenic causes in ecosystems. We need to reach net zero for all of agriculture and land emissions by 2030. This is a new carbon law for nature that sets a benchmark, a universally applicable yardstick for ambition for actors at every scale. From 2030 to 2050, we need to be increasing sinks on managed lands. This is in addition to the sink we're already, the subsidy we're already getting from nature by absorbing our fossil emissions. This new carbon law for nature is the pathway we need to take. It is defined from both what is possible from bottom-up analysis, what we can afford and must do, but also a top-down analysis based on the integrated assessment models in the IPCC reports and the 1.5 degree reports. This is both necessary and possible. How do we get there? We need a roadmap to accelerate these changes. These curves that I'm presenting on this slide for accelerating protection, management, and restoration of natural ecosystems are accelerating the protection by about, we need to cut in half our destruction every 5 years for the next 10 years to reach 4 gigatons of mitigation from protecting natural ecosystems. We need to be doubling our climate smart management of working lands every year through 2026, and then reaching 8 gigatons of mitigation on more than 2 billion hectares of working lands, agricultural and forestry lands around the world, again by 2030. And we need to begin rapidly restoring ecosystems and building a new global industry of restoration, a new sector, a restoration sector, to accelerate to 5 gigatons of mitigation annually on managed lands by 2050. This roadmap can only be reached if we act with people at the heart of it. These people on the land, indigenous peoples and local communities, the foresters that are actively managing land, the farmers that are growing our food, the livestock managers that are helping to feed us, and the public land managers who help to manage our shared resources, together need to act in response to the enabling conditions that we provide, all of us, social movements, governments, businesses, the financial sector. Together, these action tracks can deliver more than 13 gigatons of mitigation from natural climate solutions while transforming food systems. This slide that I have up right now is showing the extent of mitigation. We estimate 87% of natural climate solutions mitigation by 2030 to be closely integrated with food systems. We cannot achieve our nature and climate goals without transforming our food systems. Most of our managed lands, through farming, through diet shift, through climate smart grazing, are intimately related to capturing carbon primarily on land. And we need to protect the carbon and the stores we have through indigenous rights and tenure, through a new system of climate critical protected areas, through no deforestation supply chains, and through a climate smart forestry. I will stop there, and I look forward to telling you more at Climate Week and to responding to any questions. Thank you.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much indeed. That was very interesting. We had a technical problem seeing the slides, but funnily enough, actually hearing you speak, it was all very clear to me. I don't know if it's clear to the audience. Yes, they're all nodding. They're all nodding.
Well, I'm happy to share some other method and tell you whatever I can.
Yeah, we'll get the slides up on the website, but it was really good. Okay, so I want to ask Johan Falk of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative back on stage for some remarks, maybe on what we've heard. So a carbon law for nature, that's a new one to me, so that was quite exciting. But any other thoughts?
No, climate and nature absolutely goes hand in hand. It's two sides of the same coin. We can't just address climate, we have to address nature at the same time. So it's so essential.
I think that's absolutely clear, and it's absolutely clear that we also have to, in a sense, make sure that we actually manage the land where we're producing food right now in the most sustainable way, so it doesn't get degraded, it doesn't die, and people are forced to chop down more trees to actually grow food, which could be part of the pressure that's coming right now with this great food challenge with linked with the Ukraine war. We need to manage the land we've already exploited in ways that get carbon back into the soil, that get biodiversity back in, because these are the little engines, right? Not just the birds, but all the little wiggly worms and beetles and bugs in the soil. They're the little engineers underground, making sure the soil is healthy. So it's a complex process, but I think we're getting to grips with it with some of these reports we're hearing about.
That's right, Nick. But we also need to shift what we eat, basically.
Yeah.
And that's what we shall talk about right now, basically. Yeah. We need that shift to plant-based food, sustainable, healthy food. And we also, as we heard, we need to cut food waste. And in particular, since we are in a food crisis, I think the argument is stronger than ever to actually start to do that shift. So we are also really excited to have some leaders like Oatly, Defugo Technologies, Electrolux, and so on. Some companies actually driving this forward. And our session here is very much about, okay, how can we scale plant-based food? It's all about exponential scaling and also cutting food waste.
Absolutely.
So very excited.
Exactly, because if food waste was a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, according to United Nations reports, which is absolutely staggering, bigger than, after China and the United States, the third largest emitter. So we need to get to grips with that. Quick question, is Owen joining us afterwards? Or is he...
My fellow travel, Owen Gaffney, is joining on the next section.
Okay, fantastic.
Regenerative agriculture. Yes,
excellent, good news. Okay, Johan, thank you very much for being with us, and we'll move to the next section.
Thank you.
Super, thank you very much indeed. All right, so So, it tells me here that we're going to hear from Owen Gaffney. Hello? Somebody talking to me in the earphones? Ah, okay, we're going to do it that way, are we? Okay, fine. So, let's now move on and let's hear from Richard Swannell, Keynote. He's the International Director of WRAP. And WRAP stands for Waste and Resources Action Programme. And they work with agencies like the United Nations Environment Programme on the whole issue of food waste. And they have global food indexes in terms of food waste and many, many other things. Richard, you're coming in by the magic of Zoom. And I wonder if you could give us your keynote, Richard. Thank you very much indeed.
And thank you, Nick, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. And you've already heard quite a lot around the food crisis we face, and I just wanted to share some statistics around that. So the commodities, the food commodities we all depend upon have increased in price 30% in the last 12 months. And in February to March alone, food prices increased by 12.6%, reaching record highs, all-time highs. And it's against this context, and this is exactly what Johan has already said, that against this context, that the fact that we waste a third of all the food that we produce on the planet becomes even more important to tackle. So amazingly, we actually waste 1.3 billion tons of food around from farm to fork across the whole of the planet. Now, that costs well over $1 trillion, and that cost is only going up as a result of food inflation. And we need an area the size of China to grow the food that we throw away every single year. And Nick, as you've already said, this has a huge environmental impact. So food loss and waste accounts for around 10% of greenhouse gas emissions, or to put it another way, and I thought this analogy was fantastic and worth repeating, that if food waste was a country, imagine it would be a really big, smelly mountain of food waste, a mountain. But that country would be the third biggest emitter on the planet behind the USA and China. And of course, the other thing is this is against a backdrop where 1 in 9 people at the moment go to bed every night hungry, although that number is expected to increase given the food crisis we expect. So what can we do to tackle this? Well, the answer is, I think we can do 3 things to tackle this. We can actually bring in policies, and we can bring in regulations that can help. We can bring together businesses across the whole of the supply chain in public-private partnerships that can drive change. And also we can actually work in our own homes through consumer behavior change campaigns, helping us all reduce food waste in the home. And let's just focus on this, because this is something that we can all take away from this particular session, something that we can do now. So research that UNEP conducted and the RAP assisted with showed that actually the average amount of food that we throw away in the home is 75 kilograms per person per year. Now, interesting, that doesn't change greatly across the countries around the world in the data sets that we have. So that means that we all throw away more than the average human body weight in food every single year. So that's absolutely huge. And interestingly, that's costing a lot of money for the average family in the UK. It's costing about $900 per year. So a real opportunity to save money through reducing food loss and waste in the home. So we already know what works. And there's an opportunity for us, I think, to extend and go more rapidly on what works. We know that consumer behavior change campaigns like Love Food, Hate Waste, which is operating in 7 countries around the world, can make a big difference. In the UK, it actually helped reduce food waste by 31% over 10 years. That's 1.4 million tons less food. So if we can do it, and that saves a large amount of money, around sort of $6 billion US per year in the cost of that food had it been eaten. So we think that there is an opportunity for us all to actually change the way we do things now and reduce food waste in the home and make a contribution towards reducing that food loss and waste in the supply chain, as well as working with companies and indeed governments to tackle food loss and waste across the whole supply chain. So just let's think about what can we do in the home? And we can actually boil this down to 2 very simple things. Buy what we need and eat what we buy. And actually critical to that is actually planning. You know, I, for example, take a picture of my fridge or my cupboards before I go shopping so that I know I'm going to buy the right amount of food. Getting portion sizes right is absolutely key. Not only does it reduce food waste, it also can help us eat a healthier diet. Storing things in the fridge, for example, actually extends shelf life quite significantly, allowing us more time to eat the food that we buy. And of course, use those lovely leftovers. If you have any leftovers, pop them in the fridge, pop them in the freezer, and use them for another day. So hopefully, what I've done here in this short talk is actually talk about the fact that we waste a third of what we produce on the planet. We can tackle this, and we can all as individuals make a progress on this in our own homes today. As you said, Nick, we don't have much time. So the time to act is now. Let's all start making a difference today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Richard. And you're getting a nice applause here from the live audience. Thanks for being with us. Our next guest is Cecilia McAleavey, who's Director of Sustainable Eating and Public Affairs at Oatly, which is best known, I suppose, to millions for its plant-based alternatives to milk products. Cecilia, great to have you here. Are you with us? Yes, you are. You have the floor, the stage, the sky, and all our appreciation for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to talk a bit about global challenges. We've heard about them, and all of us here are very much aware of it. What is very positive about challenges is that it can really drive and inspire to change. So what I would like to talk about first about our journey. So Oatly is a company built on the very idea of a change. We come from innovation at Lund University. There was our founder. He was a PhD student researching on the factors behind lactose intolerance. And he realized that the majority of the world population actually suffer from lactose intolerance. And as an entrepreneur, he realized, fantastic business. I see the opportunity. And then he tried different crops and fell in love with oats, because it has a beautiful little soluble fiber called beta-glucan, which has proven to balance cholesterol in the blood. Isn't that amazing? So he started to try to make those oats into something liquid and developed a patented enzyme technology, which has helped us and developed where we are. So this is what we are about. We exist to make it easy for people to converse. We want to help people to converse from traditional dairy products to plant-based products. And our CEO, who came on board at 2012, he saw very clearly that this is not something that is for people who suffer from allergy or from intolerance, but this is something that should be mainstream. This is a solution. This is part of the solution to the challenges we're facing. We need to, as we've heard from several speakers today, we need to shift towards more plant-based eating. So that is where we make a huge difference, of course. It is through our products. And since I'm not in the finance department, I think we should be all happy about that. I need to just verify my papers, the figures, but I would like to share with you. So 10 years ago, we had a turnover of 20 million euros and 50 employees in a little office in Malmö and one little factory in LandScale here in Sweden. And now, last year, we actually had a turnover of 605 million euros and 1,600 employees worldwide, building factories worldwide. So what I want to share with that is it's a beautiful story in the sense that here is an organic growth. It happens, and it's driven by consumers because the help is not from policies or regulators, is despite that. So that is also why I'm so pleased to be here with you today and share. We need to urge, like we've heard from several speakers, we need to speed up the transition happening. And what we do as a company, in addition to develop and sell plant-based alternatives to traditional animal-based dairy products, is we actually engage in different projects to drive this societal change. And I will try to quickly, I will speak very, very quickly now, so you must be with me. I'll try to share with you 3 examples in the time we have left. This is one example, because I think our farmers, they're key in this transition, obviously. These are the hands of Adam Arnesson, a fantastic farmer who runs a farm here in Sweden. We engaged in a research project with him and looking, what does it take? Is it possible to transition a traditional farm? And he was from 1 year to the next. The first year, what the farm produced was 90% feed and 10% for food, farming crops for human consumption. You're with me, huh? Thank you. And by only doing a slight difference, you can see here, it's only from 10 to 26%. The result, I think, is very inspiring and amazing. It's small scale, it's one farm, so bear with me, I mean, but it's still. So he more than tripled the number of people that the farm could feed, and he more than halved the emission of greenhouse gases, and you know the challenge we are facing in terms of land use. So I just wanted to show you, but that is only one farm, and now we are enlarging this project and engaging farmers in projects on different parts of the world. Second example which I want to highlight is climate footprint declaration. We believe firmly that this is missing in today's consumption. This is a way to empower consumers to be transparent and declare the climate footprint of products, food in particular, that's what we are on, but wouldn't it be ideal if we could do it on everything? And that you as a consumer knew the climate footprint of what you consume. Another thing about it is that it will push the value chain. I mean, how beautiful if the emissions of greenhouse gases and climate footprint becomes a competitive advantage, that companies compete by that. Wouldn't that be beautiful? So that is something we push for, so we declare it in all our packages in Europe. We started like that, and now we do it in back of pack. So if you have any Oatly product, take a look at the back. And we drove a campaign challenging the food industry to do it with us, and we run a campaign to it. My last example is this. So I would invite you, because there are so many challenges in the policy environment that actually is based on old norms. And right now there's a public consultation on the EU school milk scheme. So I would invite you to respond to that. One question is, should we include plant-based drinks? I mean, it's a minimum, right? And also, if you can see here, this is why the school milk subsidies is there. It's actually to actually make sure that they are fed milk at an age where taste preferences are set. So those were the very, very speedy 3 examples.
Speedy.
Yes.
Well done, Cecilia. It's
Thank
a bit
you.
it's a bit, yeah. Trying to get everything out in a few minutes is really tough. Now we're going to move, by the way, we'll see you later for a panel.
Yes,
yeah, okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, now we're going to go to a panel. We've got David Coleman, who's chairman of Defugo Technologies, so come on down. Come and join this beautiful black sofa we have here. We've got Vanessa Butani, who is Vice President of Sustainability at the Electrolux Group, the global appliance company, well known. And Richard, hopefully you're still there on the magic of Zoom.
I am indeed.
You are indeed, okay.
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you absolutely fantastically, Richard. Loud and clear from the United Kingdom. It's like the Eurovision Song Contest, isn't it? Okay, great. So let me introduce perhaps David a little bit more, whose company is based in the Asia-Pacific region. And you have a unique technology for food and farm waste, we understand. And we want to know more about that. This company he's chair of Defugo Technologies, as we said. And also you grew up on a family sheep and grain farm in New South Wales, Australia. So you've got to know a lot about this. David, you're going to tell us a little bit more, kicking off with some slides I think you might have about what is this technology and what is it doing.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, look, to borrow a line, and at the risk of preaching to the choir here, Stockholm 50, we have a problem, and that problem is food waste. We've seen over and over again the statistics over the last couple of days of what we're facing here. 1.3 billion metric tonnes of food is wasted every year. that food waste represents a solution that we need to address. And Defugo approached this a couple of years ago, and we came up with what we call the universal processing plant. The universal processing plant's key goal was to take produce and use 100% of it. So use everything, waste nothing. Once we completed that goal, we then set about with the idea of, why can't it do anything? Why does it have to be a single produce solution? And that's when we start to look at what investment means. How do we sweat the asset 365 days a year, 24/7? And the solution to that, as I just mentioned, was the universal processing plant. That then allows us to look at produce in a holistic way. Instead of looking at the apple as just being apple juice, we can now break the apple down into various parts that go into non-dairy, that go into animal proteins as binders, goes into alternate proteins, and can be used in a range of different products that are outside of just the scope of apple. That holistic approach has a huge impact for investors. And when investors can get behind these ideas and we can challenge the leaders that are out there to make some decisions and get away from the do as I say, not as I do kind of cycle, then we can really start to make some change in food waste.
Okay. And just coming back on one thing, so literally, if I gave you a banana and you put it into the universal processing plant, which sounds a bit something like Doctor Who almost.
We'll call it the UP.
Yeah, okay.
Very Doctor Who now.
Okay. And what, it separates the fats and the proteins and the minerals and all the different elements, and then you work out where that goes afterwards to, say, into feed or into something else.
That's exactly right. And that's that holistic view that we can now have of a plant. And as we move into the absolute need to transition into plant proteins, we can't afford to be just going after the gooey bit in the middle that we like because it has sugar. We need to be using the whole plant. Even if that end use is just back into fertilizers, we still need to be having that holistic view. But as you said, the use of the lipids, the oils, the different fats, and most importantly, the fibers into how we can create healthy foods.
And is this actually working somewhere? I mean, it's not just a concept car?
No, this is far from a concept. No, it is absolutely working. We've been in the United States for about the last 30 years with one of our major customers, and we're now moving the UP into the Apple world, and we're expanding into a range of other products in different markets. But it's scaled. It works across sugarcane, it works across apples, it works across any type of fruit or vegetable.
Right.
And also oil crops.
Okay. All right, that's super. That's a good start to that, because we were Googling before to try and work out what to ask you, and now I understand a lot more, David, so thank you. Let's go over to Vanessa Butani, the Vice President of Sustainability at Electrolux. How does what you do fit into this topic of food, not wasting food? That would be great.
Great. I think we're actually maybe the step before you, so trying to avoid the food getting wasted in the first place, right? And I was thinking about some of what Richard was saying earlier. We know that 1 kilogram of food waste is the equivalent of about 25,000 of these half-liter PET bottles in terms of the carbon impact, right? So I took the 75 kilograms of food waste he said we had per year, and I multiplied that by the 25, and I got 1.875 million.
Wow.
So it's huge, right? If we can try to reduce that food waste is incredible. So some of the technologies that we have to do that is, of course, about preserving food longer, helping, the salads stay crisper, helping you to be able to keep that food in your fridge for longer, and then identifying what you have and knowing what you can do with that. So we've also got digital tools like the My AEG, which is one of our brands, AEG, My AEG Kitchen app, which gives you tips and tricks on how you can use the food that you have to give inspiration on new recipes and things that you can do to try and avoid having to throw that food out in the first place.
Are you... I mean, I know Electrolux, of course. Anybody in the room knows Electrolux. I mean, it's such a well-known brand. But what about the poorer countries in the world? This is a slightly bigger challenge, isn't it, sometimes? I mean, some communities... Interestingly enough, we'll have a person on later who's the executive secretary of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. He's from Mauritania originally. And he'll tell you that they grow enough food in Mauritania to feed everybody. But it only grows at very discrete moments in time. So suddenly they have this massive bumper crop, and they can't, do anything with it because there's no canning factory, there's hardly any refrigeration, and so it rots. And they can't sell it because there's no price to it, because they've just got too much of it.
Yeah.
And so bringing refrigeration to the poorer countries is a big deal, right?
Absolutely, and I think that's what we see as people are moving into the middle class, right? I think it's maybe a refrigerator or a phone that comes first, but then, or sorry, a TV or a phone that comes first, but then a refrigerator is high on the list of what people want. And I mean, just having that refrigerator and being able to keep that in your home, and then for us, of course, it's about making that as sustainable possible, using as little resources as possible so that you can keep it plugged in all the time to keep your food fresher for longer. But it's in the home, really.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Richard, just back to you again. I mean, you were talking about, you know, the whole issue of food waste, why it's so big, etc. I mean, do you see that the urgency of dealing with food waste is spurring innovation? I mean, David's talking about their system here, and are you seeing that it's being reflected in business trying to do something more sensible about this?
Definitely, yes. I mean, this is something that we're seeing right around the world. We're seeing, because the key thing is the three core things we'd like to do with food waste. One is prevent it in the first place, exactly what Vanessa just said. We don't want to have food waste. We want to get it to people who need it. If there's surplus food, can we get it to those in need? And there's lots of interesting technology which are enabling really good links between sources of surplus food, like restaurants and hotels, like retailers, like food manufacturers, and food banks that can actually take those foods and give them to those in need. And given the food crisis, that's increasingly important. And then actually building on. And if you can't do that, if it's inedible at that stage, then turning it into something valuable, something useful, is so fascinating. Now, a classic case of this is a cheese manufacturer in the south of England that is actually taking his cheese waste and actually putting that into a distillation unit and making vodka from it and selling that as well. So he sells cheese and he sells vodka. Wow. So that's a sort of fantastic example. But, you know, there are plenty of others. Animal feed is a very, very important thing to do. You know, rather than cutting down rainforest to grow soya for animal feed, why not use as much of the food waste as we can, if we can't do it other purposes, and convert it into sustainable animal feed and do it that way. So, yeah, we're seeing innovations in all of those areas, and I'm beginning to see the emerging of a circular economy in this space, Nick, for the first time. But, boy, do we need to move fast.
Yeah. I love the idea that I knew you wanted to say he's going to take his cheese waste away, because, of course, cheese waste is called whey. But you realise you didn't fall into that trap, because it could have been a bit of a joke. Yeah, OK, good. So, David, I saw that you're from Australia, but the company, I think, is headquartered in Singapore. Is this right or wrong? So is it applicable then to the developing countries? Because I get a sense that what you're dealing with in the food waste story is very much from the agricultural products being made, and then there is waste linked with that, and ensuring that that waste doesn't just get trashed, right? So you're trying to use every pip in the apple, presumably. I mean, every stalk has some use. In theory, the skin, the this, the that, so that nothing of the apple is wasted, which sounds a beautiful concept. Does it play out in the developing world too? Do they get it?
Yes, I think, and to pick up on the analogy you used before, where there's a very short window of time by which fresh produce can be used in the developing world, one of the key things to do with that fresh produce is to stabilise it. So what the UP allows you to do is to invest into a plant that can take that biomass, break it down into its various parts, and then stabilise it so it can be used later. We're then able to switch produce. So we can do an apple in the morning, an orange in the afternoon, and mushrooms in the evening. So the flexibility of that at low cost. Very, very single pass. Our only dilution is water, and we're water positive. So we take water from the environment in the form of plants and put it back into the environment. Low-cost processing is the key part to the UPP and is designed, actually, to work in those areas where the developing world needs it the most.
And does it come at in different sizes?
It is scalable, and to date myself, it's like a Meccano set. You build the UPP to the actual size of the processing that you want to do, rather than normally where you go, I hope to be able to process 10,000 tonnes, so I'm going to build and overcapitalise something. We've actually designed it the other way around, where you can, as your target biomass increases, you can just increase the plant to that. So very, very cost effective, works around cash flow, and enables, as you pointed out, the developing world to participate now in 2022, not 2030 or 2040.
Okay. Last key question, David, is I mean, it sounds brilliant. Is there a breakthrough technology, or is it simply that nobody had ever really thought about doing this before? Or is it both?
It's a combination of both. I think, unfortunately, in food processing for about the last 100 years, we've been very, very focused on the idea of crushing. We took a very different approach to that, which is to remove the crushing, remove the overheating, which diminishes the value and the nutrition value of food, and take a very, very different extraction process that then allows us to maintain the cellular structure of the food. We don't need chemicals that way to stop oxidization. It naturally preserves itself. That approach meant 100 years of development, which gave us about 1 or 2% extra yield. It was a bit like developing a faster horse. We took a moon leap step forward in extraction, and something like an apple, we're 34% more yield than an existing processor.
Right. Healthy food, healthy eating, this is really at the heart of everybody's lives. It should be part of everybody's lives in every part of the world. How is Electrolux, maybe develop that theme that you were touching on before? What is Electrolux doing in that area?
Absolutely. I think our big challenge when it comes to food and healthy eating is really making, and I mean switching to a plant-based diet, right, is making it delicious, making it fun, and making it easy. Because we see also through our research that the big challenges that people have while they're not switching to a plant-based diet is because it takes too much time, I don't know how to do it, and I don't think it's going to taste good in the first place, right? So we got to get over those hurdles, and I think that's where we really try to look at what we can do in our innovations today, with looking at, steaming food, which is also great for leftovers, to make them freshen up and taste really good, and other technologies we have with air frying as well, using a minimal amount of oil to fry your food so it's still more healthy but gets that nice crispy texture that you want. And then looking even into the future where we're trying to reinvent the kitchen, thinking about how the kitchen kind of looked for the past 50 years has been really the same. Maybe we've opened it up a little bit, but what we're doing now is looking up to 2030 and how do we think the kitchen is going to look at that time. And we've got a new concept we called Grow, which is about this new kitchen, reinventing how the kitchen looks, how we can with that enable a plant-based diet and enable people to cook more healthy using new techniques, using old techniques that we've had, and trying to use that as sort of an innovation concept for us to show, where can we go in the future and how can that influence the way that we design our products today. And another part we have is our Electrolux Food Foundation, which is a foundation we started in 2016 with the aim to really educate people about how to cook healthy, how to eat healthy. And so we're looking at 300,000 young people, consumers, teachers, and how we can really change people's habits and nudge people. And coming back to what I was saying, making it delicious, making it easy to move to a more healthy diet.
Richard, let me come back to you because this is really at the intersection of the other big issue with food waste, which is the kind of craziness in some countries that, food that has a sell-by date on it, and then they say you can't really eat it, right, or drink it. You know what it's like with milk, right? You open the fridge and it says it's 1 day old, this carton of milk, and you sniff it and you think, is that off? I don't know. It says so on the side. How do the cows know that? Sorry, no disrespect to Oatly, which is a different kind of milk-based, non-milk-based product. But we do toss a lot of stuff away because we're told by the system to do it. Richard, are you addressing that in your work in different parts of the world?
Yeah, I think we are, actually. And we did some research actually back in February where we looked at the influence of best before dates. So let's be clear, on use-by dates, these are dates that are about food safety. And for use by, we need to follow those dates. But of course, you can freeze items right up to the midnight on the use by date. So you can, that's where technology really helps. Chuck it in the freezer, then you can actually use it later, and that's absolutely fine. But best before is about quality. Now, there's been a lot of debate as to whether best before actually leads to food waste or not. I mean, speaking personally, I thought actually if people had an indication as to the quality of the food, that might encourage them to eat it by a particular time rather than throw it away. So we looked at this in quite a lot of detail. And what was fascinating is if you took the best before date off fresh produce, because it's not obligatory in many countries around the world, then actually people actually were more likely to eat the food than not. So actually, date label, in this particular case, best before did lead to more food waste of fruit and veg, which is what we actually looked at as part of this research. So that's fascinating. So you know, when we don't have that visual prompt, we're more likely to use our own senses, apparently, and actually use the food. So yeah, this is something that we're advocating as part of our voluntary agreements in the UK to start off with, and then more around the world, to encourage, you know, to use this research and these insights to help us all reduce food waste in the home.
Very important at this time as well in many parts of the world where...
Critical, absolutely critical, given the increases in food prices.
Yeah,
I mean, it's, yeah, the
shock
food,
of the Ukraine
crisis,
war, yeah.
Yeah, we can't underestimate the impact that this is going to have.
Yeah. I wonder about next year. But anyway, that's another topic. Good. So, and does that reflect some of your work as well, Vanessa? This kind of, you know, what does it mean to conserve food that you've already bought?
Absolutely. And I think looking at also, I mean, we can go back to sort of techniques from our grandmothers about preserving food and how we can do that, right? So, and how we can build that into our way of cooking today. So I think there's a lot to be said. And Richard, like you're saying, I mean, with the, you know, forget the best by date, or smell it, look at it, taste it, and see if it's good or not. So lots we can do.
David, just on what you're doing as well, so are there any numbers floating around the world on the amount of waste currently, as it were, linked with the processing of a core food product, an apple or a banana or whatever it is, or a sugar cane, or that is in a sense lost in the system when it's not fully utilized?
Oh, very much so. In apples, we waste 30% of what we process. In citrus, 50%. In sugarcane, 90%. So we've got this unspoken amount of food waste that goes on top of the 1.3 billion tonnes that we already throw out that we're not monetizing and we're not using to bring back into the food cycle, that we can actually use to reduce these costs that we're talking about. Yeah. Inflation is high right now. Cost of food is increasing. If we use more, so waste nothing, use everything, we're going to naturally reduce those costs. And so when we start to approach the food waste in the value that it has, because when I talk about citrus, the 50% we throw out, that's where all of the vitamins are. That's where all of the fibre is. That's where all of the minerals are. That's the healthy bit we need to bring back into our food chain so we can improve not only the cost of our food, but the value that food is bringing to us as a human.
And because all those crops, right, they've had, in certain cases, fertilizer thrown at them. In some cases, unfortunately, large amounts of pesticides and other basic inputs that the farmers has put in. They've used water, they've used soil, they've blah, blah, blah. And yet, you know, 30% or whatever, in some cases, other numbers are being lost. I suppose some proportion always goes back into, you know, mulching and things like that in some countries, but in other cases, what happens to it? It just gets burnt or something, or it gets...
Unfortunately, landfill.
Landfill.
Which is, you know...
Which is the last and most absurd thing to do with anything.
Absolutely. Yeah. And as we've heard today, is if it was a country, the biggest contributor.
Right. If it was a country, we wouldn't want to live there. No. As Richard pointed out earlier on, it might be quite smelly. All right, good. Well, we've come to the end of the show. This section anyway. I want to thank you all for being with us. It was a very interesting debate, a good chat. Best of luck with your OOP. Okay, sounds like a medical problem. I'm going to see my doctor. Yes, no problem. Ooh, it's very good for you. Vanessa, what Electrolux are doing, which is just beyond, much beyond, well beyond just refrigeration. It's also about behaviour and very interesting about the kitchen. And Richard, delight to see you as usual, full of interesting facts and figures and perspectives. So thank you very much indeed. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, what am I doing now? Let's have a look and see what am I doing. Could I be welcoming Owen Gaffney, or am I welcoming Johan Falk back? I'm welcoming Johan. Fantastic.
Right.
Owen Gaffney's like a mythical figure, you know, that will eventually arrive.
Let's see if he arrives later today. Yes.
I'm sorry, what did you...
Let's see if he arrives later today.
So apparently we're looking forward to a video, is that right? Before you've started the video.
Not sure.
Okay. now we're going to move to the topic of regenerative agriculture. And Johan, great to see you again here from the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. Give us some thoughts about this section.
Yes, because now we talked about shifting to healthy plant-rich food, cutting the food waste. But the other part is, of course, we need to change agriculture. As we heard from Johan and Gunhild and the other speakers, it's absolutely essential. We call it regenerative agriculture, basically. And it's about improving the quality of the soil. It's about moving away from pesticides, fossil-based fertilizers, and monocultures. And there are a lot of good projects around, but I think the key point is now actually how can we scale, and how can we scale sufficiently fast? And it's all about incentives, of course. It's about government policies, and it's about the big companies, their part, the keystone actors in the value chain, how they can take the lead actually in this transformation. We need all the forces to work in the same direction. So I'm really excited to hear about how can we scale faster.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. No, thank you very much indeed. So let's go to our next section. Thank you very much, Johan. And we are going to welcome on stage for a keynote Owen Bethell, who's Environmental Impact Lead Global Public Affairs at Nestlé. Owen, are you with us? Come on down, Owen. Come on stage. Very nice to see you.
Great to be here. I know you've all been waiting for Owen Gaffney, but I'm Owen Bethell, so I hope that's not an issue. But I'm very glad to be here, and we're really happy as Nestlé to be partly supporting this important dialogue over the coming days in Stockholm. Climate change is a really important topic to us as a global food company, in fact, one of the biggest global food companies there is, and we're determined to do something about our carbon footprint in partnership with many others. So if you take the actual footprint of Nestlé from 2018, which is our baseline, it was around twice the size of the footprint of our home country, which is Switzerland. So you can imagine the size of the challenge that we're talking about. And around 95% of that carbon footprint is coming from Scope 3. So that's activities outside of our immediate sphere of control. They're coming from our suppliers, from the logistics that we buy, the packaging that we use in our products, etc. But really the biggest impact is in agriculture. That makes up about 2/3 of our overall carbon footprint, and it's really where we're focused. And regenerative agriculture is the thing that we're banking on to help reduce those emissions significantly over the coming years. We have a global program on regenerative agriculture, which involves switching around 20% of our key ingredients by 2025 to that way of producing food, and around 50% of our ingredients by 2030, in line with our goal of a 50% absolute reduction in our overall footprint by that date. So what that means in practical terms is around 14 million tons of raw materials, be it coffee, be it sugar, be it cocoa, all the other things that we buy, wheat, cereals, coming from more regenerative sources. And so you can really consider the size and scale of that ambition in terms of the moves that Nestlé is making in that direction. So regenerative agriculture is really a kind of series of interventions which are designed to, as Johan just mentioned, reduce the amount of synthetic inputs coming into farming, so reducing the amount of fertilizers that we need to use and other fossil fuels, but at the same time locking up more water in the soil using techniques like cover cropping. So that means exposing the soil for less time to the atmosphere, using things like minimum tillage, so not ploughing the soil and therefore disturbing it, and also rotating crops and using cover cropping and other techniques throughout the year to provide farmers with a more diversified income. All these measures taken together are designed to improve our management of water, lock more carbon up in the ground, foster and enhance biodiversity, and crucially, safeguard incomes. And that's the point really that we want to emphasize in our communication and advocacy, because it's without farmers on board, none of this will be possible, none of this will be achievable. And when you implement regenerative agriculture through a project, there may be a series of interventions that are required to help farmers in the process. They may see a decline in their yield initially. And so they require support in the form of financial guarantees, in terms of risk management, in terms of expertise coming from agronomists. And actually, Nestlé has a network of around 2,000 agronomists around the world who work directly with farmers to help them go through that transition. And that transition needs to be a just transition. It needs to be one in which livelihoods actually go from where they are now to a better place. And all of those co-benefits are delivered along the way. So that's our program. It's rolling out as we speak, and we have hundreds of projects underway in different types of commodity. And actually, I just learned today about a project in Finland, which not too far from where we are now, around potatoes and producing potatoes in a more regenerative way to go into some of our foods for children. So these projects are not focused on any specific geography, because we source ingredients all around the world, but they do have a set of principles behind them, which are designed to make farming better for the planet, better for communities, and better ultimately for the consumers that buy our products. And the investors that have put faith in Nestlé as a company that will deliver success over the longer term. I would say that regenerative agriculture isn't like a switch you can switch on and suddenly you've moved. It requires determination, hard work, extension services, as I said. It may be a case that some things don't work. We need to test and learn, and we need to scale up and roll out programs as they are effective in different landscapes, and with farmers really at the center as the custodians and the guardians of the land. So we're working with farmers directly, we're working through our suppliers, and we're looking to hit our 20% target over the next few years as an initial milestone. I think it's also important to understand that we're not the only company trying to do this. Really, all big food companies, including our peers, are looking to regenerative agriculture as a solution. And so that is a good thing, but it also creates a tension, whereby if we're going to a farmer with a set of requirements and another company is going to the same farmer with a slightly different set of requirements, that can cause complexity and confusion. And so collaboration is really important between the big food companies, and we're really invested in that. And I think that goes also to the policy-making space as well. If we're talking about encouraging regenerative agriculture, the programs that Nestlé invests in and other companies invest in aren't going to change the world. They're going to have a significant effect, but to really transform agriculture, we need policy going in the right direction. We need incentives going in the right direction. And by that, I mean, how are farmers rewarded by government subsidy or by government payments for the ecosystem services that they provide to the economy. I also think that consumers play a really important role here, and at the moment it's a little bit difficult to communicate regenerative agriculture through a product to a consumer, okay? Because it's a relatively new concept. It's not like organic, which is a bit better understood in general, and also has certification and ways of communicating that are effective and robust. Regen Ag is going to require a bit more work, and so that's another area that we're looking at. How can we leverage the power of our brands, whether it's KitKat or Nespresso or any of the other big brands that we have globally, or even some local brands such as our Zoigas coffee brand here in Sweden. How is it that we can use the consumer recognition of that brand to drive uptake, to drive enthusiasm from people when they go into supermarkets and when they purchase our products? And I think to come to a point that was made earlier, labeling is an important part of that. And we're very supportive of moves to provide more transparency on pack for our consumers. So I think to summarize, we've got a big program in place. We're looking at transforming our supply chains, but having a bigger effect than that. Advocating for change, encouraging others to go in the same direction. Regenerative agriculture is not just about carbon, it's about biodiversity, it's about water, but really crucially, it's about better lives in the supply chain, better lives in the consumer end as well. And so we look forward to working with others going forwards on this transformation and this journey towards a 50% reduction by 2030. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Owen. We're going to have a panel now, and Owen, you're part of that panel. Mm-hmm. So if you want to take a seat here, that chair there, or the sofa here, we're going to call back Cecilia from Oatly as well for this panel. There's Arturo Tovar, Business Development and Innovation Manager, LandScale at the Rainforest Alliance. Yeah, that's it. And me. Okay, let's do it over here. Nice to see you.
Nice to be here.
Ah, so well. Let's talk about regenerative agriculture. What is it? I mean, you touched on the fact that there's still, in a sense, people don't quite understand what it is. It sounds really good. As you say, with organic, there are well-known certification bodies that deal with that. But yeah, who wants to talk about this? What is regenerative agriculture? So our audience can get a sense of what it is and what maybe it isn't. Is it GMOs and fertilizer? Genetically modified foods? Is it no pesticide? What is it?
Well, I think we can agree that there's not a universal definition for it, like apparently. But in Rainforest Alliance, we like to see it in a broad way, kind of under a big umbrella of climate-smart agriculture. So, like Owen mentioned before, it includes biodiversity, not only carbon capture, but biodiversity, and also brings the livelihoods of the people in the communities, in the ecosystems, into place. Because in the end, it's going to play a big part in bettering the lives of the people around it. So that's kind of the way of regenerative agriculture is seen by the Rainforest Alliance.
So when I see the Rainforest Alliance sticker on a product, I know I'm getting regenerative agriculture?
Yes, we have several initiatives, which I'm going to talk about a little bit further.
What happens when I see fair trade?
Well, no.
But you know what I mean. We're all consumers, right? You're all consumers. They're all consumers out there. We all. Tell us, Cecilia, do you have a perspective on what is regenerative agriculture?
No, but I agree. It's not like a universal definition of it. What we do in our research projects is actually to see, because we're now engaging with farmers in different parts of the world where the conditions look different, and to also try to diversify, and where we, of course, want them to include oats for human consumption in the rotation, because it's about leaving a tradition of monoculture and move to something else. And as part of our research projects, we actually look as well, and we do this with universities, obviously, well-established universities. We look at what are the barriers, and also what are the special conditions at the different countries in terms of soil, in terms of infrastructure. There are lots of different things. So sorry, I'm not giving you the crystal clear answer that you're looking for here, but Owen will.
Owen. The Owen, not the mythical Owen, by the way, a real living person, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would complement the comments from before. I mean, it's about a series of interventions tailored to the locality, right? And those interventions aim at improving the health of the landscape and the health of the community, right? So it's better soil health, it's more resilient farming practices, and resilience is something I didn't really mention so much, but it's a really important part of this. So if you're growing coffee in a plantation and you start planting shade trees, not only does that sequester carbon, but it also helps provide protection from higher temperatures. So it can be many things, but it's really about principles which produce better outcomes for nature and for people.
We had Johan Rockström on the show, the great Swedish professor on all things climate change, and Gunhild from the EAT Foundation earlier. I don't know if you saw them, but they've got this EAT Lancet Commission report, and they're launching the next phase. And they're trying to bring, I think, some sense of, maybe not targets and timetables, but some kind of structure to this story of what is healthy eating that doesn't trash the planet. Do you think regenerative agriculture needs a process of, when you say more of this and more of that, well, it needs to be 10% of this, more land cover, 15%, or within 10 or 15? In other words, do we need some structure to it, or will that paralyze it?
Well, we do think some structure can help, and that's something that the Rainforest Alliance has been working towards. So actually, we have a couple of initiatives towards it that I would like to talk about. One of them is a regenerative agriculture scorecard. At the moment, this one is done for coffee farmers. So basically, what it does is it guides the farmers towards all of these regenerative agriculture practices. It comes from the certification that RA already has. So yeah, so it's taking it a step further. And we're planning to develop this for different types of commodities as well. It's under development. And then to really scale this up, we have another kind of framework, which is at the landscape level, which is called LandScale. But maybe I will talk about this a little bit further down the conversation when we talk about how we plan to scale this to the next level.
Okay, okay. Good. Let's ask a bit about government. I mean, I think it's clear from the conversations earlier that, okay, when it comes to renewable energy, things are going quite well around the world. When it comes to the electrification of transportation, things are moving now. It could go exponential soon. The nature-based area still is a bit of a headache in terms of getting on track with the Paris climate change agreement, and I think that sort of comes out in some of the conversations earlier. Probably because a lot of small-scale farmers around there as well, around the world, that it's hard to actually get to them, to help them, in a sense, to move into different practices, perhaps. But what do you think governments could do, and what could governments do at the next climate conference, say in Egypt, about the issue of food and land and emissions and regenerative agriculture? Is there scope there, or is it some other place where governments have to make some kind of decisions internationally? Seems to be happening a bit in the EU. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, it should come from the government level. I mean, COP27 is a really big opportunity to put food on the agenda for climate, and that's something we really strongly support as a company, and I know other companies are also in the same position. And yeah, it was slightly disheartening to hear that it might have been dropped, but hopefully that's not
the case. We'll get it back. We're going to get it back.
We're going to get it back. Yes, we're fully on board for that. So yes, it's a big opportunity. I think that we've had a lot of discussions recently about repurposing subsidies. So instead of saying you need to get rid of all subsidies, it's more how do you move them into a better direction? And so, you know, could you move from subsidizing fertilizer to subsidizing practices which require less fertilizer? And so the income isn't affected by the farmer, but you create a better outcome. And there's various different things like that, which I think could be done.
You might have some opposition, though, from another industry that might not like that. For example, the fossil fuel industry.
True.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. We have to put food on the COP27 agenda. That's clear. It must be. I mean, look at what we're talking about here. So that is a very, very strong point that we're pushing for. When it comes to, and I'm sorry to dwell on it, but I need to come back to our research projects, which one thing which I find really interesting is we were recruiting 10 farmers to one of our research projects in Sweden. It was Uniseco, so founded by EU. And we were scared that, because Oatly can be perceived as a bit controversial, and so we were quite scared that there wouldn't be an interest among farmers to engage in this research project, which was about transition and diversity. We were so surprised that well over 100 farmers applied to take part in the project, and Sweden is a small country, so that's a huge number. And what came out from all of those interviews that we had with the farmers is that they were lacking a platform to discuss transition, and that their interest by the traditional associations are more about preserving what is, because that is the system we have created. It does take courage to do the change, and governments need to step in there, and they need to give a voice to the emerging forces. I'm a bit worried about the imbalance here, where there is a huge interest of stakeholders that gain from what is, that is what is still manifesting, and also with policymakers, that we need to make sure that their voice and platform are given to those who wants to drive the transition, and give the conditions for them to do so. So subsidies or support and all of that, that should go towards the transition and help it. And one final point, sorry, about this research project, it also showed that the number of barriers. So it's skills, it's infrastructure, and it is policies and regulations. That is actually, because of course as a farmer, you are a businessman or woman. I mean, you're running a business. You need to make it hang together and make a profit out of it. So yes, that would be my
yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, because the status quo isn't an option, to use that cliche. But I understand that when Sri Lanka just recently tried to go organic, and for a lot of other reasons, they have got a big crisis, right, in terms of food. The immediate response from the fertilizer industry was, we're here. You need more fertilizers, you need more this, you need more that. You were silly to even think about organic, right? I mean, this hasn't got to be the way. There has to be diversity, doesn't there, in thinking about agricultural systems.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, it's important to emphasize that regenerative agriculture isn't necessarily about no fertilizer, right? It's about a more efficient application in many circumstances.
Exactly.
And so, you know, it may be that it wasn't appropriate for that situation. I don't know the detail, but I would support this point around farmer interest. You know, there is a huge amount of interest. We've got many hundreds of projects ourselves up and running, and we are seeing some of the farming organizations embracing it now. US farmers and ranchers, for example, are very enthusiastic about regenerative agriculture, which is great. National Farmers Union in the UK as well. So it's moving, and I think right now it's an inflection point with the crisis in Europe, where we can choose to now accelerate this transition and not sort of take a step back, which I think some are calling for. I think it's an important moment.
Arturo, Rainforest Alliance, I mean, it has the word rainforest in it.
It does.
Which makes me think immediately it might have something to do with rainforests. Perhaps.
A little bit, perhaps.
Perhaps in the Amazon and other places, yeah?
Yeah.
So there's an interesting angle to this as well in terms of food security and in terms of inputs, you might say, to agriculture, because you've got trees, and we know forests actually recycle nutrients, that they're very important in the story of agriculture. They often the source of water from major rivers and things like that. Is that part of your story as the Rainforest Alliance?
I mean, we have been working as a Rainforest Alliance for 35 years already. So yeah, it's always towards climate positive future. So we have developed a couple of tools, like I mentioned before. So I mean, we have the certification part, of course. That's when you see the little frog in there. But we also have some other tools that are planned to use, like this regenerative agriculture scorecard that I was mentioning before. And the one that I really wanted to mention that we really see helping scale things up is LandScale. What LandScale does is helps the user, and when I say user, we're talking about communities, or it can be a landscape partnership, or it can be a local government, but it's a landscape level. So what it does is it helps them like to assess the risk and also measure impact, and be able to communicate it in a reliable and clear way to different stakeholders. I mean, both external stakeholders and internal stakeholders. So internal stakeholders, I mean, you can get the communities together, the local government, local NGOs, local companies, and local farmers working towards the same goals together. It's not, I think it's a task that shouldn't be taken just by one single farmer or in separate efforts in silos. And also to external stakeholders. So here we're looking at a way to get incentives maybe from external stakeholders, maybe from government, companies, NGOs, banks still. So it can be different kinds of incentives, like financial, preferential loans, investments, donations towards some landscape level specific projects. So this is a way that we see like from taking it from farm level to landscape level. And that's a way we can measure the impact of specific actions being taken by several stakeholders at the landscape level. So that's another one of the initiatives that I wanted to talk about.
Okay, thank you. Okay, things are whizzing along. Yeah, maybe you touched on that a little bit, and you touched on it too, which was the issue of this issue of the value chain. I mean, I'm not sure I like the term value chain, because I think for the ordinary person it means absolutely nothing. But it's everybody else you work with, in a sense, beyond your operations of your factories or your offices or the products that you actually directly produce, yeah? It's everything else, isn't it? So in fact, you making decisions in Nestlé about the fact that you need to reduce your emissions halve your emissions by 2030 and hit net zero in the future also means that all the other players down the chain need to be part of that, because they're so-called scope 3 emissions. Yeah?
Correct.
I only dawned on me yesterday when I was listening to Scania, the truck company, with the logistics companies who use Scania trucks, because both sides have got science-based targets to halve their emissions by 2030, hit net zero. But none of them can do it without the others doing their bit. And it's really interesting, because it's like pushing people, isn't it, to a higher level of climate action. you mentioned the farmers, and you mentioned you've got farmers all over the world. So do you have very small farmers, or are they big farms? In other words, I suppose I'm getting back to my question from before. How do we bring security, perspective, and responsibility to the literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of small-scale farmers who, if they don't get it right on one day, the whole family starves? Right? If they make the wrong choices about the wrong kind of agricultural production. How do we safeguard these people, but yet bring climate smart, regenerative, whatever it is, organic agriculture to their production systems? Sorry, it was a long marathon question. But they're Scope 3 emissions as well. Anybody want to handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important point. And smallholders do form part of our supply chain, several million of them, in fact. You know, we don't have farms directly, right? We buy from someone. We either buy directly or we buy through suppliers. And we have a lot of programs in place to support the end provider, which is the smallholder farmer in many circumstances, including in countries like Indonesia and Malaysia, where there's palm oil production and there are issues with deforestation. And that is often caused by economic circumstances. And so you need to address those economic circumstances to stop the impact on the natural environment. And therefore, programs will look at how is the support for the farmer positioned in a way that addresses the likelihood of deforestation taking place. Yeah, so it's only by having thriving communities, including smallholders, that you actually stop those other issues. And moving away, sourcing from other locations, is not always the solution. You know, you have to work with the community or work with the supplier to help improve, first and foremost. And that's always been our approach.
I mean, there's a new player in this game, of course, since COP26, which was something called the voluntary carbon markets, right? Where people, companies who can't reduce all their emissions can, for a period of time, offset those emissions by investing in forests in developing countries, for example. But there's still a lot of baggage with this market, isn't there, from the past, where maybe it wasn't so clear and the track wasn't so transparent what was really going on. A lot of projects seem to be ones that could have happened anyway without a UN-type voluntary carbon market or whatever, a UN market. People are trying to bring transparency to these markets. Is this at all part of this story? Rainforest Alliance, do you support voluntary carbon markets, but you want higher standards, or you're against them?
I think it's important. It's definitely an important part of the story, but there is more of to that story. I mean, because we have to look at biodiversity, we have to look at the watersheds, we have to look at the other kind of variables, also at the livelihoods of the people around the communities. So I would just like to mention as well that it's important, like maybe complementing the points that they have already said, that it's important to share responsibility, like not only to the farmers, and also bring the governments, bring the companies, bring civil society organizations into play to share the responsibility.
Okay. So we did talk about the fact that the Ukraine war, in a sense, has given a focus to many things, right? I mean, not least the people there were concerned about what's happening to them, for sure. And it is a terrible thing that has happened, and also the food prices are going through the roof. But we've known what we need to do with food and land for donkey's years, haven't we? I mean, really, or has the light just suddenly turned on? We've known for a long time. How long will it be before we really see the transformation? Or do you really feel it's underway right now? Because the big threat, of course, from the soaring food prices is, under pressure, some governments go out there and just start clearing more forests to grow more food in the way we've always done it, which would be an absolute disaster in a response to that. And that is a risk. But do you think we've got enough in the system now, enough in the can, enough ideas, enough growth in regenerative and other forms of agriculture to ensure that doesn't happen? Or are we at a very risky crossroads here between climate-friendly agriculture and going back to some of the older systems of the last 50 years just to simply grow food for people who feel that they need more food right now? I know it's different in developing countries to developed countries, but there is a kind of thread through these two things. How do you feel? Is it risky right now? We're at a risky moment?
Yes. Absolutely, and I think, I mean, of course, our primary crop is oats. And oats thrive in really like rain and stuff like that, you know. We supply from Canada and from Europe primarily, and. What I think is important, I'm sorry to come back to that, because I think it's quite telling when we're having this conversation that business and farmers are working together here. But again, we have policies in place which is backwards driving, doesn't keep up with the consumer demand, the innovation that's happening within the sector, the business that want to shift towards more plant-based in order to tackle the challenges. I mean, farmers want to meet demand, but we have a system which is hindering this. And I don't know if you heard my presentation earlier, but the very last example, which I shut out there, is a really brilliant example where we subsidize milk to ensure that is a production for a long time, and subsidize that, but not plant-based drinks. I mean, there are so many absurdities in the policy system, which have all emerged from a good place originally. But we have science today showing that it's urgent. We need to shift, and policies and policymakers must have the courage to take the necessary decision and support transition and listen to what science says here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think we need to sort of have another think about food security and what that means. Is it sort of depending on one particular country to supply 80 or 90% of your wheat imports, such as is occurring in some places in the Middle East? I think that's clearly not sustainable, and now that's been put into sharp relief by the current crisis. I also think that policy needs to recognise that, like you said, the market's moving quite quickly now, and people want to see a change, and therefore it should be supportive. It's not a question of holding back innovation. It should be allowed to flourish, and maybe that hasn't been fully realised yet, and we're still stuck in a bit of a sort of old school mindset of we need to produce as much as possible. It's like, well, no, we need to produce better, and we maybe need to think about where we produce as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Also in terms of food waste. I mean, that is also that. We wouldn't.
Oh, the food waste thing is absolutely absurd, isn't it? I mean, every time I think about it, it really is so stupid. I mean, how can it be that in one place, in Kenya, for example, many of the European supermarkets tell the farmers in Kenya, you've got to grow the beans this way, and if they can't, they come and inspect the beans to the supermarkets in Europe, and if the bean isn't the right shape, or the broccoli is not the right colour, not only do they say they don't want it, the supermarkets, but they also have a clause in the contracts in some cases, or that certainly was the case a few years ago, where the farmer can't even use it afterwards to feed his own family. It's not allowed to be used by anybody. And when I worked for the UN Environment Programme, we actually served a 4-course meal for environment ministers from all around the world from food that would have been wasted in Kenya that very day, where there's people starving. So, I mean, there are so many absurdities in the food waste story around the world, so many different stories, that if we can get a handle on that, that would be a great achievement. And then we don't have to clear more forests for food, right? Because we're actually saving a third of the food that would have been lost. It's absurd. All right, we're coming very close to the end of this. We talked a bit about COP27. One thing you would say to government ministers attending COP27, just one thing that you'd like them to see that hasn't happened, that we're still waiting to happen, that could be agreed in Egypt this November. One thing. What would you love?
We are beyond conversations now, so yeah, stop, be brave, like Cecilia mentioned, and go and cut on the bad incentives to really stuff that goes against regenerative agriculture. So I will say that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say just put food in your national climate plan and think about who can deliver that plan.
Right.
Companies and others, farmers, all those in the food supply chain.
Yeah.
I agree, and set a target, set a concrete and ambitious target to decrease the emissions from the food.
Good. And I would say that I found it really bizarre not drinking milk anymore, but after about 6 months of not drinking milk, I can't drink milk anymore. So I drink Oatly.
Excellent.
Maybe I get a year's supply for that advertising. Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's okay. I'll give you my address later. It's all right.
Congratulations.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for this panel. That was really, really super.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye. So we're going to have another panel right now. We're going to have Owen Gaffney of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative and many other things. Yes, the real Owen Gaffney will be with us, right? You can't believe this. I know, I can see the excitement rippling around the room. That's fantastic. And we're also going to have Yi Li from Terraformation, and we're going to learn a little bit more about their journey and how they're bringing Silicon Valley thinking to actually planting 1 trillion trees around the world. I think you'll be very excited by that. And we have one other guest, and I'm scrolling down because the teleprompter which I'm looking at is nowhere near where it needs to be. Arturo, no, we've had Arturo on the show. I think we've got somebody else coming on the show. Thank you very much indeed. We're having Anna Julia McAleavey, who's Global Climate and Environment Land at Essentia Development Partnerships. So right, everybody come on the show. Now we know who's coming on. It's even more exciting. But maybe there could be a mystery guest. No, just me. Owen, come on.
Hi, Nick. What an
Lovely to see you.
introduction.
Yi Li, nice to see you. Very nice. And Anna, Julia, very nice to see you too. There were just some slight changes in the script, so it's like mind reading what's going on. So good. Nice to see everybody here. We're talking about food. We're talking about land. We're talking about regenerative agriculture. We're talking about many, many things today. And probably we're also talking about trees, because there is a connection, obviously, between land, trees, and food, which we alluded to just before. Maybe I'll first go to you, Yi Li, because you're new. I don't mean you're new, but Terraformation is a relatively new company, which was born from, well, you worked at many, many tech companies in Silicon Valley, and your friend...
Ishan.
Thank you. Was the CEO of Reddit. And how does Silicon Valley thinking translate into planting trees? I mean, it's just like, what do they got to do with that? Yeah, is there a chip in every tree? I mean, I don't know.
I love. Yeah, there's a lot of assumptions I think that folks have as soon as they hear Silicon Valley and trees, and there are folks that are genetically engineering trees and other biological life forms to grow faster and absorb more carbon, and I think those are really interesting experiments. But from my perspective, having spent 25 years in Silicon Valley companies, just anybody in the audience, right? If you just think about like what are the iconic names of Silicon Valley, right? Like Apple, Facebook, Google, right? These companies, we don't actually invent new things, really, in Silicon Valley. We tend to take technologies that are working already, that are proven, and we figure out how to scale them up to the world, to billions of people, right? So Google, famously, did not actually invent the search engine, right? They're actually a fast follower in this regard. Facebook did not invent the social network. Apple did not invent the human, computer interface. So really what Silicon Valley does is take technologies that are proven and working and then figure out how to scale them up to billions types of scales. And so that's really what Terraformation, that's the philosophy or the mentality that we bring to forestry. We did not invent the tree. Billions of years old technology, if you will, that absorbs carbon dioxide, poops out oxygen, sometimes food, right?
Poops out oxygen. That's a new one to me.
Generally has, very few negative side effects. And so we would consider that to be a very proven, scalable technology. And we're just trying to figure out how do we scale this to the world? How do we scale up 3 billion acres of net new forest? How do we scale up 1 trillion net new trees? And the scaling, just focusing on the scaling piece itself is actually a significant intellectual challenge. You have to focus a lot on what are the bottlenecks that hold back existing forestry organizations from being able to plant 10 times or 100 times or 1,000 times more trees than they're currently putting in the ground each year, and how do we get 1,000 times more forestry organizations to come and join the fray? So
okay, good. We're going to come back to that because I think it's a rather tantalizing concept. Let's talk to Anna Julia. I mean, what are the opportunities and strategies which can accelerate the scale of forest restoration from your perspective, for example, through incentivizing local communities?
So I think that there's a couple of different ways in which it's important to include business in this conversation and to think about strategies. I think technology and data are, such huge opportunities for business to bring something to the table when it comes to, forest restoration, as you say, but all sorts of other types of nature protection and restoration. So if we think of a couple of examples of where Accenture Development Partnerships has been working with some of our clients, so for example, biodiversity, where Accenture helped the organization really think through how it can bring its already existing fascinating research into how they can leverage bees to understand the pesticides that are going into fields and bring some more data visualization to the platform that they created in order to really help understand where the key risks are. So that's one example where I think data is sort of really important. Another, for example, is where we've been working with a solution called Reef Cloud, really bringing the business sort of solutions and the power of technology and data to bring the facility for scientists to explore what the baseline is of the destruction of coral reefs. And by being able to sort of really gather huge amounts of images of what's happening to coral reefs, which is such a sad story that people really can kind of understand and really feel much closer to nature about, we can really try to see what the impact is on coral reefs through this sort of AI and data visualization solutions. So I think data and tech, as I keep saying, are sort of really the huge opportunities for business to bring the power of business to nature-based solutions.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about data and tech, because I was I was talking to somebody just a couple of weeks ago who's working on some voluntary carbon market work, and he comes from NASA. And I still didn't realize that there's still tons and tons of satellite imagery from all over the world that nobody's ever actually used. I mean, there's bucket loads of, it's probably not bucket loads, right, is it? But bathtubs, not even bathtubs, but huge amounts, swimming pools size, Olympic swimming pool size data that nobody's ever looked at, that can't work out how much carbon is in the soil here, how much carbon is in these trees, and it goes back decades. And again, if we should be able, surely by the 21st century, to even harvest this old data so we can get a sign of how things have been changing and what is happening to the carbon cycle, and therefore...
That's right. And I think it's really important for business to step up and lean in to the conversation about how they can protect and restore nature. So as you say, there's so many opportunities to leverage already existing data. There are new trends such as metaverse, for example, that businesses would really get excited about to really engage with those technology trends and use them in a way that brings consumers much closer to nature so that they can take action themselves. So I think it's just about, at the moment, sort of we're at the stage now and reflecting on the theme of the UNEP conference around global responsibility around the environment. I think we're at a really pivotal point now to see both the economic and the moral imperative for business to take part in the journey to get nature positive.
Owen. The real Owen Gaffney. It's great to see you. And Owen is with the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, but he's also at the Potsdam Climate Impacts Institute, working with Johan Rockström, and also involved, in fact, you're involved in more organizations I can think of, Owen. Earth for All, which is this new report, of course, which we'll hear more about, but which is basically a Club of Rome report, 50 years after they did the limits to growth. But where does all this story fit in with our theme here? Because we've moved to a theme here on protection and restoration of nature, which is a bit broad, actually, in a sense, because I think we're really talking here about land and trees and stuff like that. But what's your perception of this topic?
So, well, one thing we're working on, and Mike Wolosin was talking about it earlier. We work in Potsdam Institute and Conservation International are working on this first roadmap, an exponential roadmap for land system change. How do we scale very, very rapidly the solutions to store carbon on land? And within that, we're talking. The urgency is really acute now. There's a huge potential. soil for storage of carbon, but to get anywhere close to 1.5 degrees, we need to turn the agricultural system from a emitter of carbon of about 10 billion tons of CO2 a year to zero by about 2030, within this decade. And then we need to start pulling to net zero by then, and then to be pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere than we're giving off, to reach around 10 billion, 12 billion tons by 2040 or so. That's the scale it's going to take to reach 1.5. So we need to act at speed. I love the fact that Silicon Valley and people who understand exponential thinking and understand exponential scaling of business models are now getting involved in this. But we also need government intervention. We need to make it profitable for farmers to store carbon. So and that'll be a game changer because and that's what we need. And every decade we don't act. This is talking about restoration of land. Every decade we don't act, we're losing the resilience of the planet. The planet, the land and oceans, they currently absorb about half of our emissions. How long can we count on that if each decade we're reducing that resilience? So really the urgency, the speed, the scaling, it's all hands on deck now.
So we were going to have on this section of the show, but I think he's been delayed over at the other event, the smaller event called Stockholm +50, rather than, of course, at our studios. Thank you, for everybody. But that was the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, Ibrahim Chow from Mauritania. Great guy. And, of course, he's into the area of land degradation, and we know that whooping large scales of land around the world is either dead or dying or degraded because of maybe intensification of agriculture, maybe because of climate change itself, drying out soils, they blow away in the wind, lots of different factors. This is a perfect opportunity to plant trees, is it not?
Very much so,
because then those soils will again, they've released all their carbon, we can get the carbon back in those soils, a major contribution, bring back agriculture, bring back biodiversity. So is degraded land part of the areas where terraformation is looking? Yeah.
Yeah, and this is not just Terraformation saying so. Terraformation really tries to follow the lead of soil science, GIS, scientists, carbon scientists, and they have collectively, I think the field has collectively identified, there's multiple studies published in journals that highlight high potential areas for reforestation around the world, and there's 3 to 5 billion acres of this type of land that's already been identified in sort of the
massive,
equatorial latitude bands, right? That are just fantastic areas to work on. So there's more than enough land. I don't think that's the challenge. Scientists have already identified using what they understand of biomes and the types of species that should be there versus satellite maps of where you actually find tree coverage, and you do the delta between those, and you can find these high potential areas. So yeah, there's plenty of land to work on. It's more a matter of can we actually harness people's will, right? Corporate will, individual will, landowners, governments, right? Can we just marshal the resources to actually go do this thing that's right in front of us? And I would say, not to make it sound like this crazily difficult venture, because it is. It's going to take some doing, but as we get started, I think we're going to find that there are feedback loops in our favor. Trees want to reproduce. Right? They are living organisms, right? And if we can just figure out the ways to kind of get out of their way, really, that's really what I think Silicon Valley really focuses on, right? When somebody sees another person with an iPhone, okay, they're going to want to check out this new thing, and they're going to want to check it out too, right? And so what can companies do to get out of consumers' way, right? As they try to consume more. Honestly, that's sort of one of the big tricks of Silicon Valley is understanding bottlenecks to adoption and just removing those bottlenecks so that people can freely go do the thing, share a photo on Twitter or whatever it is, right? So, okay, how can we apply that mindset to getting out of the way of nature trying to regenerate? And that's, I think, a big mindset shift for us.
Well, I think there's nothing more empowering for individuals and for lots of people than planting a tree. And I mean, here we are in Stockholm. We know that the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005, was it, or 2006? Some people remind me, was Wangari Maathai, who was the Kenyan, she eventually became environment minister, but she founded the Green Belt movement, which empowered women and others to plant trees, and it was really inspiring. She won the Nobel Peace Prize for that. So, I mean, there's a lot of interest in trees, right? And I do think that if you can break the bottlenecks on this using data and other mechanisms, this could be advantageous. I mean, is this the kind of thinking that you understand, yeah?
I think so. And I think what's really key is, you know, it's fantastic seeing some of the companies that we've seen today who are already leading the way, and obviously some very entrepreneurial people in the Silicon Valley who are, you know, really keen to make opportunities there. But I'd say that the vast majority of business leaders actually don't know how to engage with this topic on nature really at all. So in a recent study that Accenture did for UNGC, looking at CEO, you know, opinions of the day, they found that only 21% of CEOs actually really understand the role of business and nature. So whilst we can get excited about, you know, fantastic opportunities around data and solutions, if we can't engage the business community, the vast majority of it today around the globe, to really harness all sorts of amazing opportunities and solutions to really bring greater emphasis on protection and restoration of nature, it's going to be very challenging. So as Accenture, we've recently partnered with the UK Sustainable Business Council and DEFRA, which is the environment agency in the UK, to really try to get into the heads of these CEOs and think about how to engage them and taking steps towards getting nature positive. So we created a microsite called Get Nature Positive, simple as it sounds, so that we can really start to engage with that business community, and whether they're at the beginning of the journey or whether they're, you know, the leaders of the day and providing really good examples. We just want to provide a tool that helps people really start to engage with the topic. It's really exciting to already see more than 100 signatories to that site, to committing to the journey to Get Nature Positive. I think there's still a lot more out there that can join in this.
If I can just riff on this for a second here, because I really, really just totally believe in the power of data and technology to unlock, right, to be one of these great unblockers, if you will. And you can look at examples in recent just developmental or societal time. Just look at the mortgage industry, for example, from the 1950s. People's drive in urban environments to like own a home or to have a safe and stable place to stay, that's a pretty constant thing. People will naturally tend to want to do this. But it was really hard, right, in the 1950s to get a mortgage, right? You had to go talk to a banker, talk to a human being. They're going to, like, you know, ask you a whole bunch of questions and individually underwrite this loan or not, right? And so it's kind of a cottage industry, right? It's hard to get a home loan. With the application of data, technology, right, amassing consumer finance information in one place, being able to run algorithms on that information to come up with things like credit scores, right? These are ubiquitous now, but like that's a technological advance that unlocks the underwriting of a whole bunch of consumer finance for home ownership, right? And to just from the 1950s to today, we've had this entire asset class bloom from a cottage industry to $120 trillion today, assets under management in the consumer and corporate property ownership market, right? And that's orders of magnitude more than the amount of capital that we actually need to apply to nature-based solutions. I think the estimates are around $3.1 or $3.2 trillion, right? That we actually need to apply. Like, okay, we can do this, right? Like, human beings have the wherewithal to spend that kind of money to homeownership, which is a societally good thing, right? Yeah. We surely can come up with $3 trillion for the societally good thing of not having climate change ruin all of our lives, right? So I really think that there's just a lot of powerful interaction that's going to happen between data, technology, and nature-based solutions in particular, but climate solutions overall.
Yeah. I think this is interesting, Owen, because I think it's quite refreshing to have a different perspective on this issue, because it strikes me that we've been hearing for quite a few years now that XYZ number of trillions of dollars are moving into the green finance space. And it's always my problem. I'm always saying, well, where is it? Can I see it somewhere? You know, it's pledged. How many trillions are pledged to the green economy? How many, you know, actually seeing it getting spent is really the big challenge. And if we can bring some different players that see this in a different way financially and morally, then maybe we have a chance of opening up some of the other finance people that have been a bit slow.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it is about friction now. And, there is, when you're looking at some of the most progressive companies like Microsoft and Stripe and Netflix and others who really want to invest in nature-based solutions, they really want to do it properly. It's about carbon storage, but it's also the nature positive agenda. It's about restoring and bringing back, biodiversity, enhancing biodiversity. But they find that there's even for companies like that with big pockets, there's huge friction to do huge amounts of research to find out which projects are actually worth funding. And when they did an analysis of it, I think they found, they asked for a lot of companies to put in pitches to them on nature-based solutions, carbon storage, etc. They found something like 4 or 5% of the companies could actually be verified as, really high quality, long-term carbon storage with protection of nature and biodiversity. And that took a huge effort to even establish that. And you're just thinking, how do we just take that friction, just remove the friction, make it a single click as fast as possible. That's going to be the game changer here.
Yeah, well, I think that's very true. And I think it's also interesting. I don't want to over-promote Terraformation, but I just wanted to come back to you, really, Yili, because I didn't know until I talked to you. Sometimes you hear new things, right? And I didn't know until I talked to you that there was actually this huge block on the issue of seeds. I mean, it's like, I thought, what is holding back tree planting? Surely there's lots of things, but I never thought about seedlings. And just give the audience a little heads up on that one, because if you want to plant 1 trillion trees, you need
multiple trillions of seeds.
At least 3 trillion seeds, right?
That's
and they've got to be healthy seeds and good seeds, and they've got to be the right kinds of seeds in the right place. Why is there a roadblock with the seeds?
The right kind and right place. That's really actually the core issue there. If we wanted to generate, 1 trillion eucalyptus trees all over the world, or 1 trillion bamboo plants all over the world, I'm pretty sure we could do that right now.
Tomorrow,
right? But that's not actually going to be good for the environment. Definitely not going to be good for sustainable long-term forestry. If you're trying to create, long-term permanent carbon storage, then you want to have forests that are going to endure and self-sustain and regenerate for centuries, millennia, ideally, right, in perpetuity. But in order to do that, in order to do native, endemic, regenerative forestry, you need to have native tree seeds. And do we have multiple trillions of native tree seeds lying around? Turns out the answer is no. And it's through no fault. But if you look at a lot of the seed banking initiatives that are happening today, and we're partners with the Millennium Seed Bank and Botanical Gardens Conservation International, right? So we know some of the top seed banking institutions in the world. A lot of their efforts have just been focused on these big monolithic seed banks, which is just the style of seed bank that's been funded to date. Whereas if you want to collect and store native tree seeds, then you need to do the collection locally where the founder trees are. And so the world's infrastructure, if you will, for seed banking tends to be focused on these very large centralized institutions, as opposed to a distributed network of many, many small, ideally hundreds of thousands of small working seed banks that are close to forestry sites, collecting seeds and immediately turning them back around in each planting season. So that's the style of seed banking infrastructure that we need to move to. Again, it's totally possible, right? The world has enough trees to collect seeds from. It's for better or for worse, it is one of these long pole in the tent, sort of first action items that we have to take care of, because before you can do planting, you have to have the seeds.
Exactly.
Right? So, so we need to take care of that roadblock first, and that's one of the reasons that Terraformation focuses so much on that today.
Well, coming to the end of this, very briefly, because we ask everybody this question, what do you want the governments to do at the next climate change conference in, I was going to say Glasgow, but we're well past that, Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt? What do you want them to do? Very briefly, 2 seconds. Anything you want to say? Well,
I think the Egyptian government has said really clearly that land use is going to be a big thing there. It's a big thing for Africa. I think a huge commitment on land restoration, backed by finance that's meaningful, and backed by a price on carbon to make it more attractive to do. I think it's entirely possible to get the kind of scale we need with the right government intervention.
Okay, thanks.
So I think a focus on policies that incentivize businesses to really treat climate change and biodiversity loss as twin challenges that they can tackle together.
Right.
I think it's really crucial that businesses really start to understand the benefits of tackling both and not just focusing on net zero as a sort of an isolated goal to tackle. So really, really welcome government working with corporates in that sense.
Very good.
100% agree with Owen and Anna, and I'll go even more tactical, nitty-gritty. I would love to see the conversation about Article 6 actually come to a conclusion, and please allow both intra-market trading as well as compliance and voluntary trading in intermarket.
Right, okay, that's on the voluntary carbon markets. Hopefully, in July, there will be something called the Core Carbon Principles produced by the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Markets, which is quite a mouthful. But in the end, hopefully everyone can buy into a standard that they feel comfortable with and they feel safe, that it's not greenwashing, but it's actually real green action. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure, as usual. Thanks, guys. It's good to see the mythical Owen Gaffney here. I think everybody's pleased with that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Geely. Thank you.
So much.
Thank you. Let's go. And now, Katarina, you have the stage.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. Yes, we move on to talk about how we remove the blockers. And we're going to have a panel here, but before the panel, let's listen to 2 keynotes. And let's start by listening to Rasmus Valanko. He is Managing Director, Systems Transformation at We Mean Business Coalition. So Rasmus, please join me here on stage, and you have our full attention for your keynote.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
So I'm with We Mean Business, and our work is to align companies with the climate science, and at the same time also accelerate action. Now, I'm here to declare that offsets are dead. Now, let me tell you why I'm here to say that. So I've been in this game for at least 2 decades, and we've seen an evolution of the thinking guided by the science, and also the reaction of companies in terms of what leadership on climate means. We had for a very long time companies thinking that staying under 2 degrees centigrade is enough, right? So we need to do what we can to stay under 2. Then we found that the science was telling us that the impacts of climate change are going to be so dire that we have to aim for being under 1.5 degrees. And so companies then changed. The climate leaders changed their strategies. And we in business tried to get more companies to adopt that 1.5 degree target as well. In the same way, what we've seen is that companies started where it was easy. The things that were in their control, their direct emissions from their power plants, for example, or from their trucks. Then they moved to the energy they were buying, talking to their suppliers about buying renewable energy. And latest, of course, and we've been hearing much about that during this whole week, is that companies looked at their supply chains. Understanding, where are their emissions coming from in terms of the products or services they're buying from their suppliers, or how their products are used or disposed of once they're out in the market. So the definition of climate leadership keeps changing, and the science keeps getting better and better. And now I want to go full circle, really, into what was talked about at the very opening of today. So in the opening today, we had a very science-heavy presentation or 2. And I've challenged myself not to use any big numbers right now. So let's try and keep this really simple. I mean, if we want to stay below 1.5 degrees, by 2030, nature can provide 1/3 of the solution that we need. 1/3. Just imagine that. So the other evolution that we've seen over time is people keep talking about electric vehicles, about renewable electricity, lots of technologies, right? But what we now know for sure is that we cannot tackle climate change without nature and addressing land-based solutions and emissions. So addressing agriculture and food, as we've been talking about today. So what we want all companies to be aiming for, we want them to be aiming to be climate leaders. And what that means is addressing your direct emissions. It means addressing the energy that you buy. It means addressing your supply chain emissions and your downstream emissions as well. But the reason why offsets are dead is that if you are serious about tackling climate change, it means you have to also be investing. You have to be helping to protect and to restore nature. If you're not doing that, you're not serious about climate change. It's that simple. We've heard lots of good examples of companies who are doing the right thing, showing that leadership. And what we want to do together with Exponential Roadmap, you heard Johan Falk say that climate change is one side of the coin and nature is the other side of the coin. Together with Exponential Roadmap, together with Johan Rockström, the Potsdam Institute, together with Conservation International, Michael, who you heard from before, we want to set a new standard for corporates, those that wish to be leaders, and to show the direction for those that will follow them in terms of how we're going to tackle climate change. It's not only with technology, it's going to have to be by addressing emissions from agriculture, forestry, all land-based solutions, as well as marine and seas, on top of the things that we are talking about more across the whole week and in the past. So that's why offsets are dead. It's not about offsetting something. It's not an either or. You can't do one bad thing over here and a good thing over there and they neutralize. We need to be doing good things everywhere. So the terminology is wrong. Right now, if you want to be a climate leader, and that's what we're going to be pushing companies towards, is that you have to be supporting the protection and the restoration of nature. Thank you.
Please stay with me, Rasmus. Thank you for a very strong and clear message. I have a question for you. Do you have a specific wish for what's going to come out of Sharm el-Sheikh in September? What would you like the leaders to really focus on?
I'd say just one thing, agriculture. We've heard a lot about nature, biodiversity. Not enough, though. It started to become part of the discourse in the UN system, also when we're discussing and negotiating things on climate. But the thing that we hear much less about, we hear a little bit about food, but not agriculture. And governments, as we've heard today in a lot of the different interventions and panels, is that governments have such a strong role in shaping the agricultural systems through the subsidies that they have and the programs that they have. So there's a huge potential really to leverage the UN system, governments, to change the way that we shape our landscapes so that I loved how Nestlé put it. What we want is we want healthy ecosystems and healthy communities, and we can do that together.
We can do both.
We can.
Thank you very much, Rasmus. Thank you. And now let's listen to the second keynote. It's Nick Robbins, Professor in Practice Sustainable Finance at Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. And he's also co-founder of Planet Tracker. And he should be with me on Zoom. There you are. Wonderful to see you again, Nick Robbins. You have our full attention.
Thanks so much, Katarina. Great to be with you today. So I was asked to talk about how we can remove some of the blockers, and I would like to talk about the mother of all blockers and potentially the mother of all enablers, and that's the $400 trillion elephant known as the global financial system. I'd first like to tell you the bad news, and then turn to the good news, and then highlight 5 big things we can do to remove these blockers in the financial system through strong financial rules, real financial innovation, and some genuine financial justice. So first, the bad news. The financial system is still ignoring the planetary boundaries, risking collapse of the climate system, the food system, the health system, and threatening the stability of the financial system itself. We have policy failures, market failures, short-termism, and irresponsible behavior, which are leading to a massive misallocation of capital, still towards activities that are undermining climate and biodiversity and risking stranded assets. There are also fundamental inequities in access to finance between and within countries. Developing countries have still been denied the $100 billion in climate finance they were promised over a decade ago. And also within countries, we have inadequate financial inclusion for small smallholder farmers, rural communities. And sadly, we still have evidence that the race to sustainable finance, which is very much underway, is being undermined by a combination of greenwashing and denial within the financing sector. So we need a massive scale up in sustainable finance. Overall, the IPCC says we need to increase net zero or mitigation finance by 3 to 6 times by 2030. For developing countries, this is 4 to 8 times. For agriculture, forestry and land use, it's a whopping 10 to 29 times increase. 10 to 29 times increase in finance that we need for 2030. So the good news, what's making me optimistic that we can turn things around and make the change in the financial system? First, actually, the central banks, those who regulate and oversee the financial system. Over 100 central banks and supervisors around the world are committed to integrate climate and nature-related risks into their financial supervision. This year, I co-chaired a joint study group with China's Dr. Ma Jun to show how central banking and supervision can work within the biosphere. Secondly, on private finance, we have over 450 financial institutions, such as banks and investors, who made voluntary pledges to achieve net zero portfolios by 2050. That's about 40% of global capital. And then in the capital markets themselves, we see surging demand for sustainable financial products. In the bond market, total issuance of green, social and sustainable bonds hit over $1 trillion for the first time in 2021. So how do we build on these positive steps and how do we remove the blockers? I'd like to suggest to you 5 areas of change. First, we need all financial institutions to publish transition plans by law. We need mandatory publication by all the world's financial institutions of net zero and nature positive transition plans, showing clearly how their assets will meet climate and biodiversity goals with a laser focus on ending deforestation. Secondly, we need planetary integrity in financial rules. We need the financial regulators to hold banks and investors to account for their climate and nature risks and their impacts and work to stamp out greenwashing. Third, we need to green the money supply. We need central banks to include clear net zero nature targets in the financial operations they provide liquidity to and also to the assets they buy. Then we need to make, fourthly, all financial innovation sustainability linked. We need to continue the rapid growth in trusted green and sustainable finance to provide natural climate solutions. Here, sustainability linked bonds have real potential. And Planet Tracker has proposed that Brazil, for example, could issue a deforestation linked bond where the country would pay a low interest rate as it meets its targets to end deforestation. And fifthly, we need to finance to drive a just transition for food and land use. We need to make sure that financial flows for net zero and nature are overcoming rather than deepening the inequities in the food system. It needs to be people-centered. This means upholding human rights and labor standards in financing the transition for indigenous peoples, for land workers, rural communities, as well as supply chains and food consumers. Financial justice, then, for food and land use means also diversifying the types of finance we're thinking about, promoting mutual financial organizations and cooperatives, as well as community-based financial institutions, which are servicing the communities in particular places. These could be big financial institutions such as a cooperative, such as Rabobank, or very, very localized organizations. So my sense is if we take urgent action on these 5 areas and many more, we have a chance to deliver the exponential change in finance that we need. Thanks very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Nick Robbins. And stay with us for the panel, please. And let's also introduce Sandrine Dixson-Declève, co-president of Club of Rome, who should be joining us here. There you are. Wonderful to see you again, Sandrine. And also we have with us Hanneke Faber, who is president of Global Foods and Refreshment at Unilever. Wonderful to see all of you here on this wonderful big screen. It's actually the biggest LED screen in the world, we've been told. So you're big in many aspects here. Wonderful. So after having listened to Rasmus and also Hanneke and Sandrine, to Nick here, what are your spontaneous reflections? I'd like to start with you, Hanneke. And we need some sound for Hanneke, please. There you go.
There we go.
Excellent.
No, certainly listening to both the previous 2 speakers, we need companies to take a leading role. Offsets are dead. Agriculture is absolutely an area in need of massive, urgent change. So that's certainly something Unilever wants to lead the way in.
Thank you very much, Hanneke. I'll get back to you with some more specific questions on that. Sandrine, your initial reflections, please.
So, thank you for that. My initial reflections, and it's good to see both Hanneke and Nick, would be that actually there were a few missing pieces that I didn't see enough reflection on. One is that we have two dichotomies. We have a problem of access to food, in particular, if we're talking about agriculture, and huge amounts of hunger that are still growing across the globe, and we can see that this is being exacerbated now by a conflict. And then on the other hand, we have overconsumption of food. And so I do think that it's very important that we look at that dichotomy. In addition, we have no systems thinking across land use in general, so the over-commodification of our timber, as well as the over-commodification of our food, which tends to, again, create issues with regard to real access to prosperity for the people that actually are living in those countries that tend to be actually, through the trade system, producing most of those different resources. And then the third key point that I would add is that we're not looking at building resilience within our system. And that resilience that needs to be built within the system, again, is tantamount to what we're seeing right now in terms of the Ukrainian invasion, which is that we have so many dependencies on certain food products, which if the value chain is disrupted, we then see that we are going to have increased hunger or lack of access or food prices that go up. So I think that these three are key issues that still need to be addressed, which have not been addressed properly, and which were part of the role that I played also as the co-chair on resilience for the UN Food System Summit.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. This is indeed all about resilience here. So, Nick, from your perspective, from the financial perspective here that you bring into this, what are your reflections on Sandrine's points here?
I always agree with Sandrine, and she's absolutely right. I think one of the things we're looking at here is actually how we got these this intersection of systems, and we find it very, very hard to link these systems together: climate, food system, financial system, human health, and so on. And I think that's something we do need the sort of systems transformation, but actually doing that in ways which become very operational by business investors is really important. I think the resilience point is absolutely right, and I think we still see that agenda lagging behind the business and financial focus on net zero, and it's where we need to place a lot more effort. And again, I think within the financial system, that's something that central banks and financial supervisors can certainly stimulate through the use of stress tests and so on, to make sure that the portfolios of banks and investors who are lending to small businesses, to large businesses, to governments, to communities, that they are really properly resilient to the shocks of climate change, and also not contributing to undermining the resilience that we have.
And also, just like Sandrine pointed out, it's just not the shocks from climate change, it's also the effects of the war that's happening right now. So there are so many instabilities in the system here that really threatens lives on a big scale. So, Hanneke, what does Unilever do in this field to contribute to the climate goals for 2030?
Yeah. Before I get to the climate goals, I just want to echo what Sandrine said. We have to feed the planet and save the planet. And we have to do that at the same time, which requires system change. So in the short term, that's going to take keeping borders open. Countries being self-sufficient on their food supply is a pipe dream. Even the US, the most self-sufficient country on the planet, is not self-sufficient. What's happening right now with the Black Sea ports is absolutely atrocious. Putin is using food as a weapon of war, and it is simply tragic. So trying to keep those supply chains open in the short term is absolutely critical. And then what we already needed before the war is reduce food waste from farm to fork. A third of all the food that's produced gets wasted. Africa, the entire production of Africa is as much as what gets wasted in Europe. So that needs change. And then we need to farm in regenerative ways that increase yields for farmers and incomes for farmers and reduce emissions and pollute less. So especially that last piece is a really important part. of our Unilever strategy to get to net zero. So our commitment on climate is to be net zero by 2039, which means achieving net zero emissions covering scopes 1, 2, and 3. And we have a shorter term target to reduce our operational, so our scope 1 and 2 emissions by 70% in the absolute by 25. And it's really important to translate those long-term targets to shorter term targets, because otherwise it's après moi le déluge, someone else will fix it later. So we've got pretty stringent targets for our people for what they need to deliver now. And then if I look at the building blocks of that for us, it's product innovation, which can be all kinds of things, shifting to plant-based foods, biodegradable cleaning products, reducing plastic, of course, warming up our ice cream freezers. Lots of innovation that has to do with our products. But the biggest and hardest thing that we need to do is decarbonizing our supply chain, and especially our agricultural supply chain. We work with millions of farmers around the world, and we need to move together to get regenerative agriculture practices into every crop and every market that we work in.
So Hanneke, from your perspective at this huge corporation, blockers, which are the major blockers and what is needed from policy perspective to remove them?
Yeah, when we talk about scaling up regenerative agriculture, so climate positive agriculture, the main blocker is not the farmers. They are up for this. Actually, a lot of regenerative agriculture practices are age-old practices that they know and like. But a successful transition from how they farm today to regenerative agriculture takes money, time, training, measurements, and it can take 4 to 5 years. So we believe that big food companies like ourselves, but also governments, must take responsibility to support farmers in that transition. And we need to do that now. So at Unilever, we have 90 different programs, either live or planned, or we're applying regenerative agriculture principles with local farmers who supply us, track the results for impact, and then financially support that transition. And I'll just give you one example because, you know, it's kind of a complicated word, regenerative agriculture, but it's really not rocket science often. So one example is work we're doing with soybean farmers in Iowa, in the US. So soybeans are a big ingredient for Hellmann's mayonnaise, and we sell a lot of mayonnaise. Soybean farming, you might not know, is quite mechanized. So lots of big, heavy equipment on the soil. So that erodes the soil and creates nitrate pollution in the water. So back in 2017, we started a partnership with the Practical Farmers of Iowa and ADM with about 100 farmers with a cover cropping program, which means, you know, in the off season, you plant another crop to keep the soil covered and to reduce erosion. It's that simple. But of course, that costs money. Farmers would do it, but it's money and time. We're now 5 years into that program. We've expanded to 750 farmers, all large-scale farmers in Iowa, on 50,000 hectares there. Water pollution is down by 33%. Greenhouse gas emissions are down. Soil erosion is way down, and yields are up. And that combination, and measuring that every year, makes the program sustainable, and eventually farmers can do this by themselves and don't need the financial support. So that's one nice example. We've got many more that we're working: rice in Arkansas, tomatoes in Spain, dairy in Vermont, you name it. And our focus now really is to fund and scale these programs quickly to all our key crops and countries.
Thank you, Hanneke. Are you sharing these good examples? I mean, openly, how are you sort of scaling them in your organization and maybe also to other companies?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So actually, I was asked that question a couple of times last week in Davos, and we probably should be doing more sharing. So of course, within our country and with our suppliers, we share, because the learnings of soybeans in Iowa hopefully will translate to soybeans in other places, and what we do in tomatoes in Spain translates to tomatoes in India. But actually, we'd be quite happy to share the practices that work and don't work, because we also learn what doesn't.
Of course, yeah.
More externally as well. So that's a great push, and we shall pick that up.
So you're open for connections here.
Absolutely.
Excellent quick collaboration. So Sandrine, when you hear this from a major company like Unilever, what is your response? Is it good enough? Are you inspired? What do you want more?
Well, Yeah, I think Unilever has always been on the forefront of trying to shift the relationship with the food system. So I wouldn't say that I would go against what Hanneke has said. I think that it's fabulous, and in particular the support for regenerative agriculture. I think that regenerative agriculture and agroecology practices and really bringing back soil health is absolutely fundamental. And when we talk about blockers, I think there are still some really key blockers to that. As Hanneke said, farmers already, we're seeing in the US also a huge push from big demand coming from, for example, General Mills or even Walmart, some of the big corporations that are working with farmers that are also guaranteeing access to regenerative products to those farmers in the same way that Unilever is doing. But what's not happening actually is the perversities in the market are still actually going towards industrial agriculture. We are still subsidizing pesticides. We're still subsidizing actually high fertilizer use. We're still subsidizing industrial agriculture in the same way that we're subsidizing fossil energy. So we need to really shift those subsidies, and that would enable the transition and give the lead time, which is exactly what Hanneke has been referring to. The other key point is access to short-term loans or even long-term loans, de-risking those loans. So working with banks and the financial institutions and the private sector to de-risk farmers. You know, farmers constantly feel that they are at the end of the stick in terms of the economy. They're the ones that actually are not really integrated into our economy. And so maybe I could make two final points. One is that because of that, we have set up a really important new consortium coming out of the UN Food System Summit of 6 key organizations, all of us that were part of the action tracks, to really try to underpin this systems approach and also work with cities and build corridors between cities and also rural communities. And this is called the Food Forward Consortium, and we launched it yesterday. I'm really pleased to be part of this consortium. The other key point is that we're working with C40 to do exactly that. So to build up these urban centers that will actually drive regenerative agriculture, working with rural communities. What do you do then? You actually not only shift the production practices and get healthier soil, healthier food to people, but you also ensure that you're empowering rural communities so that they feel that they're actually part of a broader system, an ecosystem that they are now economically thriving in rather than being disenfranchised. And this has one last very important effect, which is to stop the growth of populism and also this real sense of disenfranchisement in these communities, where actually they will be voting against green laws and a shift towards climate change and decarbonization.
Thank you very much, Sondre. This is all interconnected, of course, and the point of populism is very valid in this discussion, as in many discussions on sustainable transitions, of course. So, Nick, from your perspective as a financial expert, I'm coming now to the final question in this panel. It's what would you like for the leaders at the COP27 in Egypt to focus on when you look at this field of agriculture and removing the blockers?
Hanneke has already highlighted that in a sense, we can't really wait for COP27. I mean, we've got a really serious global crisis going on now in terms of the global economy, in terms of the food crisis, threats of serious famine, the energy crisis, and so on. And I think we need, well before COP27, within the G20 and others, really highlighting how we're going to drive forward these solutions for a long-term sustainability in nature-positive economy, for climate change, and really bring in the financial sector and bring that together with the corporate sector. I mean, Unilever is owned by many millions of shareholders and bondholders and so on. And I think if we bring the corporate sector, the business sector, the government policy together, and also think about where we need to fill these gaps, as we heard from Sandrine, in terms of access to finance. And that's a real issue for developing countries. So if we are thinking about Sharm el-Sheikh, the Egyptian government are already thinking about a just financing framework. And that really means we need to be thinking about the financial inclusion for smallholder farmers and rural communities across the global south. But I think we need to have solutions in place really well before COP, because we are in a very serious situation. situation.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Hanneke, just a short note, final note from you about looking forward to Egypt and what you might want them to focus on.
Yeah, thanks. I think, first of all, put food on the agenda, which wasn't the case at COP26 in Scotland. We have a food security crisis, and we have a longer-term crisis with the food system being responsible for a third of all emissions. So we have to put it on the agenda, and then I'd love for COP27 to look for commitments from governments and the private sector to support regenerative agriculture. Call for governments to repurpose subsidies, as Sandrine said, and call for companies to fund and scale programs like the ones I described.
Thank you very much, Hanneke. Final note from you, Sandrine?
Yeah, I'll just add to that very quickly. I think that exactly, let's have a food day. Let's put food on the table. Absolutely. It makes absolute sense with the crisis that we're going to be seeing. Also probably in the Middle East, by the way. Secondly, we've been calling for an investment platform for food systems transformation, and we will be pushing for that. And I look very much forward to working with Nick and Hanneke on making sure that we do actually have an investment platform for food systems transformation. And the third is actually working with many others, including WRI and other organizations, on the call for a food stability board, because I think it's absolutely essential now, as we see this crisis moment that we're in, that we look at the possibility of setting up a food stability board in the same way in which we have a financial stability board.
Well, thank you very much, Sandrine. Thank you very much, Nick. And thank you very much, Hanneke, for joining us today and sharing your insights. To be continued.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. And now I'd like to invite Ingmar Rentzhog and Johan Falk from Exponential Roadmap Initiative up to share your reflections on this segment.
Thank you, Katarina.
What are your thoughts, Ingmar, if we start with you?
I'm a little bit upset, actually. Not because what we have seen here is great with companies and organizations working on solutions, but what we have the consumers. They want to. We have the consumers. They want to change, and we have a lot of solutions out there, but the regulation, the governments are working against those changes. One example was Oatly put it very well. We have in European Union, schools are getting paid to serve milk.
Cow's milk.
Cow's milk. Are you allowed to say milk to something else?
Well, not
That's
really,
a debate.
but just to clarify.
Anyway, cow's milk. And the reason why they do it is to get kids used to the taste. Think of this. We have a lot of things out there with high carbon emissions, like fossil fuels. We're also paying the oil companies to extract oils. It's not the cheapest energy. We're paying them $5 trillion per year, according to IMF, in fossil fuel subsidies. And the same for the food system. We're paying it with our tax money in order to get people addicted to something they don't like from the beginning. I mean, shouldn't a product have a market themselves without us paying for that market? I mean, that is what I believe in, and I also believe in a future, and it's kind of stupid to choose extinction. So that is my impression from today. But what I like about it is that many of the speakers here have spoken about this, because it's not just enough to work on solutions today. We also need to change the regulation. And many governments doesn't listen to people anymore, but they listen to global corporations. So global corporations needs also to become activists and change those stupid old ways of doing things.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Ingmar. And Johan Falk, what are your reflections?
I think it's absolutely clear we focused on climate, which is absolutely in the middle of our absolute focus, but we need to widen that to climate and nature, as we talked about before. And I think that will happen this year. So that means for all the companies, basically, that we start to integrate nature with climate in actions and targets. That will happen this year. We need, just as the energy transformation, we need just as fast transformation in terms of the agriculture system towards regenerative agriculture. The same focus on transforming is absolutely essential. And also we need this huge movement in what we eat, basically, in terms of our diets towards more healthy and plant-based food. That has to happen. And that also means that, as Ingmar said, a problem is that a lot of the government subsidies is actually supporting a destructive path so far, which is actually accelerating global heating.
Yes,
that
and
needs to change.
And those subsidies are also accelerating.
Exactly.
They are increasing in Sweden and in so many countries just this year. It's crazy. We're not working in the right direction. We're working in the wrong direction. This must be addressed. It's stupid. This is something everyone active in the climate field needs to speak out about, because people don't really know about this.
So that has to shift. But I think it's really promising. What needs to happen is that you really put together the absolute pioneers from the supply side, basically the companies, the cities, the countries which go in the absolute front line to show the way and start to scale these strategies. And we need to unleash, as Andrei said, a lot of funding, basically, to enable this transformation and make it a race to the top, actually, that the ones going in the front line will be the most competitive.
Well, excellent, Johan and Ingmar. Thank you for joining us again here and sharing your final reflections on this session. We're now going to connect to the UN stream at the big UN meeting here in Stockholm before connecting over to the Spotify studio. So first, a glimpse or going to the UN meeting and then over to Spotify. Thank you.
We're forced to leave their rural areas and move to the cities. And this, of course, leads to a great many difficulties locally, regionally, and internationally. But Iraq, however, continues to work. And we have acceded to a number of international treaties, including the Paris Convention, and we have presented our national reports and our NDCs, and we hope, we cherish the hope, that we will enjoy the support of the international community when it comes to financing some of the programs that we have elaborated to improve the status of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers.
I thank the Acting Minister of Environment of Iraq for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Jan Budaj, Minister of Environment of Slovakia.
Dear Chair, dear Madam Executive Director, distinguished colleagues, it is with much delight that I am attending in person a solemn moment such as the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations Environment Programme. Over the past 50 years, UNEP has been the creator and guarantor of many key environmental conventions. The right to environmental protection and truthful information must be shared by all. Despite this, at this very time...
So, hi, we are live here with the Spotify Climate Action Studios from the center of Stockholm in connection to the Stockholm +50 conference. So I'm so happy to be joined by two superstars here to talk a little bit more about food and innovation, which definitely is one of our key challenges that we need to solve. So I'm Hanna Gran, and I'm the sustainability lead at Spotify, and I'll be moderating this session with Pernilla and with Fanny. So I'll just start with introducing, if you can introduce yourself and what you're doing, and then we'll dive into the topic. So Pernilla?
And to begin with, Hannah, thank you so much for having us. It's an honor to be here. My name is Gunhild A. I'm the CEO and founder of a Swedish food tech company called PetGood. And what we do is we work for a more sustainable and transparent pet world. And to do that, we have developed a range of insect-based pet products. Believe it or not, pets are actually responsible for 25% of the global meat consumption. So there is a massive problem here to be tackled.
25?
Yeah, it's crazy. So that is what we're spending our days working towards.
Yeah, then it feels like a problem that needs a little bit solution.
Exactly.
So cool. And Fanny, you're focusing a bit more on the human side at the moment, right?
Exactly. So I'm starting up a new food tech platform on behalf of Axel Jonsson. And this platform will both enable collaboration with Indo group because the group companies have exposure towards across the whole food value chain, but also to invest in food tech startups.
Interesting. And then it feels like Stockholm is a very interesting space as well for food techs at the moment.
Definitely. So much is going on in this space. So yes, we have a lot to do.
Yeah. And maybe if I start there in terms of what is then food tech? What is it that is defined as food tech?
So I see food tech as solutions which help us to transform the food industry in a more to provide both more sustainable but also healthier food, which are produced in a more sustainable manner.
So there's a lot of things to solve in the whole value chain there.
Yes, and it is a very complex system, and it involves many stakeholders across the food value chain. So I believe collaboration is extremely important to speed up change.
And are collaborations common, would you say? Are there a lot of collaborations, or are people focusing a lot kind of on silos at the moment?
I would say much could be done, but also there are plenty of initiatives to improve collaboration. So the food tech platform is one initiative, but also I would say that investors are actually collaborating more now than before, I would say.
Maybe it is kind of the increased focus on climate that is helping. And is you seeing that as well, Pernilla, that it's more collaboration across the industry and in terms of both investor and company side?
Yeah, absolutely. And also actually within the insect space, I think it's super important that the companies that are involved in working with insects of various forms are collaborating. For example, we have a very close collaboration with Protix, the insect farm based in the Netherlands. So working with them with, for example, product development and so leveraging their experience and insight from a research perspective and our insight from the consumer dialogues perspective. Those type of collaborations are definitely key, both to be able to develop the best possible products, but also to be able to know, how do we basically meet the demands of the consumers to be able to drive this massive change that is needed.
Yeah, because I loved you say the insect space. That's like a super exciting space to be in. Yeah, and maybe dive into that a little bit. So, what is it? What type of insects, and how did you even start to focus on insects?
Yeah, so we are working with an insect called black soldier fly. So it is produced in insect farms, and insects are super cool. I've become a little bit of an insect nerd over the last couple of years. But insects can thrive on organic waste. So that means that, for example, food waste that otherwise would have been thrown away, insects love it as a food. So they eat that food and then they develop into high quality protein that can be used in our specific case for pet food. And insects, if you compare, for example, if you produce 1 gram of normal meat from beef, if you compare that to 1 gram of insect protein, you can significantly reduce, for example, your carbon dioxide footprint. So that is really, really cool. And we all know, of course, that we need to change the way that we're treating the pets and the planet, and then the insects can be a good solution for that.
And interesting because so many people are focusing on, becoming vegan themselves. And we also have of course, the boom now during the pandemic and so on with pets. But I have never thought about that before I heard about this solution. So yeah, it's a little bit of an education challenge, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's also what makes it so cool, because pets eat the same thing every day in comparison to humans. So that also means that once you convert one pet, you can actually have a significant impact from that specific pet. So having a dog is equivalent to having a car in terms of carbon dioxide if it's eating normal meat-based diet. So you can really, all pet parents out there, encourage them to have a look at what they're actually serving their dogs.
And I just have to ask, why is it that particular fly? You said the black soldier.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it is two different reasons. So one is the sustainability aspect, that it is very resource efficient. And the other aspect is that it is a really high quality source of protein for pets. And both aspects for us are, of course, very important because to pet parents, they, of course, want to make sure that they serve the pets the best possible food. So they would never serve something that is not as good as the other the dog food that they serve the pets today. But there we have really found a win-win. So, for example, the British Veterinary Association, they're saying that the black soldier fly is even better than top steak for dogs.
So that's kind of the poster boy then for insect food. Black soldier, I'll remember that. And you say they live on kind of waste, which is, of course, tackling two problems. And I guess that's something that you focus on a lot, Fanny, as well, the waste problem of the food system.
Yes, of course. I believe that upcycled side streams are, they have a lot of potential. So, for instance, in my previous job, I invested in a company called Cafe Bueno, and they are collecting spent coffee grounds and processing them through a biorefinery process and translating them into high-value ingredients for the cosmetics industry. And that's just one example of how you could make use of side streams.
Yeah.
And also, I also believe that you could use side streams as input for example, precision fermentation and create single-cell protein, which is kind of, as it says, single-cell protein. It's a very healthy and nutritious protein, which would also, just like insects, a very high conversion rate.
And what is that sounded so cool, but what is a single cell? Is there something you can have today, or is it more for the future?
Yes, so there are already meatballs on the market, and actually Corn is the first single cell protein company. And they have been existing for 20 years, but they haven't been they haven't innovated a lot lately. So there are some new startups on the market, for example, Mykorrhiza, and they have Swedish meatballs made out of this precision fermentation technology.
Cool.
Which is their original idea was to use waste side streams, but now I think they have changed since I last talked to them. But it would be possible. It's just about when handling waste, you need. Sometimes it's difficult to understand exactly like the volumes and the predictability of the waste streams. So I think that's one challenge working with waste.
And then on the other side, so waste is one of it, and then of course it is what we eat in the first place. So do you have any? You mentioned some exciting example on the waste side. Is there anything else in terms of the food for the future, or maybe that it's already out there today?
Yes, there are many cool initiatives to improve the way we eat. For example, there are lots of alternative proteins on the market. We have single-cell protein, which I just mentioned, but also plant-based alternatives. And I think a lot of innovation is towards upgrading the current plant-based alternatives out there, because I don't know if you're vegan. Vegans, I've tried a vegan diet, but I can't stand the vegan cheese.
Everyone come back to cheese. I think it's so true. And have you had, burrata? Then it's difficult to make the switch.
Exactly.
Yes.
So the cheese is a big challenge, but also I would say the juicy beef. And a lot could be done on the fat components. And for instance, there's this company called Melt and Marble. It's a Swedish spin-off from Chalmers. And they are using microbial technology to come up with a new kind of fat with the same melting properties as real animal fats. And that's actually extremely important for the whole mouthfeel and the whole experience of the meat and the juiciness. So I think we will see a lot of development within the plant-based area, but I also believe in a spectra of alternatives. And of course, cultivated meat is one innovation in vogue. Let's see, as Sweden, I believe Sweden, we might see cultivated meat in the future, but I think it's 5 to 10 years until it arrives to Sweden.
But it feels good that we are approaching this from basically all solutions, so not taking anything out, given that we don't have that much time, of course.
Definitely.
Yeah. And have you tried some of these yourself?
I've tried a lot of stuff, a lot of weird stuff. I haven't tried cultivated meat yet, but hopefully I'm going to Israel, and they are the front runners in this space together with the US, so I hope to be able to taste cultivated meat then.
You have to come back then and let us know.
Definitely.
But I've heard about Singapore as well. You could do the chicken nuggets.
Singapore, that's true.
Yeah. Okay, exciting. But of course, one thing is having these solutions. The other one is, of course, making people make the switch. So Pernilla, how has it been easy to kind of get into people's brain and make them buy insects for their dogs, or are there some tough discussions?
No, there are definitely some tough discussions. I mean, people are super passionate about what they're feeding their dogs. I would never have expected. We get the most craziest comment on Facebook ads telling us, or people telling us to basically close down because they're so passionate about this. But so we have to spend a lot of time really making sure that we're educating people, and both about in particular I would say the health aspect for the dogs, because of people are worried that the dog, for example, doesn't get the nutrition it needs, and so and there we need to spend a lot of time really making them feel comfortable that it is a super good alternative. I would, for example, never feed Siri my dog anything else after knowing what is included in our food versus other dog foods on the market. But I think that is also, if we look at the broader picture, maybe the most difficult thing with these new technologies, and so that it may be more expensive, for example, than other solutions on the market, and that of course can be a hurdle in itself. We want to be a pet food for the many, but if it's super expensive to produce, it's difficult for people to make the switch. Luckily, we have a price point that is okay, and a lot of people have decided to switch to our product, which we're really happy about. But I can just imagine, for example, with cultivated meat and other things like that, to make people make the switch, it's important that it is accessible for all, basically.
Yeah, that's something we talk a lot about as well. How do we reach the ones the 10% that is not already super interested in this space, but really the broader masses and so on. So it's a tricky challenge, but it feels like it's becoming more and more mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think once people get to know and understand the benefits for the dogs, I think a lot of people become super passionate about our brand. So we have a lot of brand heroes that are helping us to spread the world, and which is really amazing to see. So I think we need to with all these new technologies, we need to spend a lot of time educating people. So yeah.
And I mean, you have a little bit of a different challenge, of course, because people want to look at dogs at Instagram and so on, so that's good. However, it might be more difficult to sell in the insects. But I guess from a communication perspective, it's an interesting angle to it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think actually, since a lot of people, they know that this is a big problem that we need to basically tackle the way that we feed people on the planet. And I think then knowing that your dog, if it gets the best food, it is a relatively easy switch to make, because you can make a huge impact just by serving it another food. It loves it. It's doing great. So there is really no downside. And I think that could also, that is of course a challenge with, for example, humans, that you need to basically make humans switch every single meal for everyone to have an impact. But there I also think it's important to encourage people, as you said, Fanny, you don't need to be a 100% vegan. It's okay to have your cheese if you love your cheese and those type of things. It's more important that everyone try to think about what they're doing than a few, as you're saying, Hannah, a few doing it really perfectly.
And also making it a bit more fun. What are you seeing in terms of that kind of communication or education challenge, Fanny? Has it changed a lot, or what are some challenges at the moment?
It's still a big challenge to reach the mass market. But of course, there is a switch in terms of consumer awareness. One thing that remains a big challenge, as Pernilla was talking about, is that price is still a steering factor. And unfortunately, many of these more innovative products, they are much more expensive to produce and also produce more small scale. So that remains a challenge, and I believe that we as an industry must collaborate to help consumers and nudge consumers to make better decisions, but also to decrease the price, increase the price parity of more sustainable alternatives.
Could it be increasing the price then of what is not as good for the planet?
Definitely. So we could use taxations, and we could also price externalities into the food prices. So that's one way of doing it. But when it comes to new food, it's hard. It's about the human brain. That's why I think you have a very smart angle, starting with introducing insects in animal feed, because dogs don't have the same kind of perception of insects. It's just about creating nutritious and tasty food, and they will continue eating it. When it comes to human, it's so much about identity and culture and background, and you don't switch eating habits over one night. And I think everyone here has tried to change eating habits, and it's really, really hard, because it's about changing your brain and your behavior, and also your impulsive behavior. And I feel that here's where the chefs come into the picture. It's so important to work with new taste experiences and chefs to be able to create a positive perception of new, more sustainable food. And I think, now I'm talking about many subjects at the same time, but I believe we could do a lot within schools.
Yeah.
We have home economics. Why are we not using home economics more to create those positive taste experiences out of very sustainable, nutritious food?
Yeah, because it feels like many parents say that, it comes down to they want to serve something more sustainable maybe, but then it always comes down to that meatball or so, because ultimately you want just your dogs eat anyway. So it's a little bit easier, hopefully. But kids, sometimes very picky eaters. So I think school is very interesting. I heard, for example, we have in Sweden a lot of boar, which is a meat that is not used whatsoever. So if we can get kids to actually like it in schools, and then suddenly they go home and I'm really up for boar today, please. Then it's of course a nice way to tackle that problem. So yeah, schools
Definitely.
feels like an important place. I mean, myself, I learned to eat so much in school that way, because you try out. Yeah.
And many parents don't cook. So many kids are not grown up with a relationship with cooking and an actual relationship with food and what the food comes from. So I believe that,
And I think that is a super important and interesting point, just like thinking about, for example, what a meal costs at McDonald's versus a meal, like if you're trying cooking a healthy meal for your kids. It's quite sad, actually.
Now, hopefully we'll see some changes there. But it feels like it's a very fun space at the moment. People are actually, it's not, of course, it's tricky to make the switch, but people are a bit more excited. And I think, to your point also, just chefs cooking with this food, so you understand what it could be. We actually had the benefit of having a lunch at Fotografiska yesterday, kind of the 50 years ahead in the future food. And then it was served as a taco and as bibimbap. I hope I pronounced that right. But that was also cool to actually take, food that people eat a lot, but just transform it. And that's probably why we see so much meatballs as well. Because if it's something that is very approachable, it is that one meatball and something that you could easily make the switch when it comes to.
And I think it's still pretty cool, because we, at least in the as I talked about the dog food space, there are a lot of passionate people who really want to drive change and really have realized that this is a really, really big problem. So I think we can just as well trust the consumer and trust people, that I think people are so important to drive change, rather than also the big, for example, the governments. And so I think a lot of power comes from the people, actually.
And do you see differences? Europe compared to now I know you're more in Australia as well. Do you see differences in terms of regions?
Yeah, I definitely. It is, we see that people who are very, for example, educated, and so they of course have spent more time on, for example, researching the environmental situation, and with that they're also more willing to spend more money on making sure that their pets are served the best possible diet. And there are also differences within different European countries. As we are currently focused a lot on Sweden, and then we're launching in Australia during the summer. So I can't really tell about the consumer perception there yet, but looking forward to learn about that market as well.
And you mentioned there as well Israel, and then we talked a little bit about Singapore. Why do you think these kind of hubs pop up? Is there anything particular with the general sentiment among inhabitants, or is it more government that is making it easier?
I would say it's both, and it's also very research driven. So I think when it comes to those deep take cases like cultivated meat and single cell protein, it very much comes down to the universities and also subsidies from or like governmental funding, I would say. So it's both, but when it comes to consumers, of course, the attitudes vary across countries. But I also think it's a big difference among generations, across generations. And the younger generations tend to be more open-minded and curious to try out new food concepts. So I really think we should take advantage of that. And I think also talking about an animal feed, I think dog owners care so much about their dogs. So I also think it's really good to tackle the question through that angle.
And people often also, I remember I used to work with pet stores in the past, and they also said it's very kind of price incentive because when it's a downturn, people always prioritize their pets over their own food. And when it's good times, they want to kind of celebrate with their dogs. So it's always a win-win. People always spend a lot of money on pet food in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. The scary thing, though, is that since people are treating their pets like a family member, there has been a trend in the market. Luckily, we're trying to stop that at the moment, but feeding their pets human-grade meats. And that, of course, is not good at all from environmental perspective. So it's fantastic that they are really, really passionate about their pets. We love that. We just need to make sure that they're choosing insect-based protein or insect-based pet food instead of human-grade pet food.
And you talked a lot about both, collaborating with governments and so on, but both of you are very much based, of course, in science. So you talked about how you found that perfect fly, black soldier. Now I learned it. How is that kind of collaboration between the academic, the scientific world, and the startup community?
No, I think it's fantastic. So we also have an in-house vet team, for example, that is also spending a lot of time on research because we see that as key to convince consumers to try the new products. But yeah, so and also like with working with, for example, a lot of universities are doing studies on insect-based protein or insect-based pet food, and so there's definitely a lot of attention in this space at the moment. And it's fantastic to see the strong results that are coming out of it as well. So yeah, very promising for the future.
It feels nice that people are meeting kind of halfway in terms of both wants to get their message out. Are you also doing a lot of work with scientists and academia in that space?
Yes, so that's part of the platform I'm creating, but it's a very new initiative. So I've just started to have some meetings in that space until now. But we also have Axe Foundation within the group, and they are doing a lot of research studies within the future of food. So they definitely have a really good connection with Research Sweden. And I've also seen so many good initiatives where they are building these platforms to support entrepreneurs and startups, and also to connect startups with big corporates.
That's nice, and then everyone can just leverage on each other, and we'll save loads of time. But that's also something we looked at when we have now a climate audio drama, which was also the same thing. We wanted to create fiction, but based on science, so true science fiction in that sense. And that was also, it was so interesting to see those worlds coming together a bit, because sometimes, the scientific language is one thing, and then sometimes the more kind of startup innovation creator communities talks a little bit different. But it's so nice that more and more are coming together and realize they need one another to get the message out, but also to focus on the right thing. So you not have a great idea, but it's not based on science. So it feels like much more dialogue is actually happening. We'll have a scientist here as well next time. But we make sure to do that. Yeah. And we need to wrap up soon. But given that we are here at Stockholm +50, we thought, we don't want to look back the past 50 years, but instead look forward 50 years. So basically Stockholm +100. So I'm going to ask each and everyone, what would you say? Maybe if I start with you, Pernilla. What do you think the pet food industry and so on will be in 50 years?
Well, I would be super surprised if it includes any normal meat, to be honest. Even in the pet food industry, we actually see cultivated meat as a new trend. There is also, of course, insect-based pet food as we are working with. So I would say that the pet food market has significantly developed, and I would be surprised if it's not dominated by insect-based pet food or another similar source of protein. But regardless, the most important thing for us and for the planet is that pet parents realize that they can make a huge difference by switching dog food, or pet food. So I would be surprised if that hasn't happened in 50 years.
And I just say I remember right, you said 25%, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there is a huge, like every pet parent should really feel empowered. There's a massive opportunity there to make a change for the environment.
I like that, more an opportunity rather than you're doing this. But, and also hopefully easier for people to make that switch for their dogs than do it themselves. So,
exactly. Yeah.
And Fanny, what would be your hope for 50 years in the future?
It's a huge question. I think first of all, the agriculture will change a lot. So we will see much more region adopted agriculture, where you will see ingredients and products and an offering, consumer offering, which is per country, like not as wide as it currently is. And I also believe that consumers will demand more healthier, like more nutritious food, and also that these consumers know what their bodies need, and that there are tools on the market to help them navigate among different kinds of products to optimize nutrition, but also to lower the sustainability footprint a lot.
So it's not only price tags in the stores, but a bit more information as easy.
More information, yes.
Yeah. And then final question. I mean, this wouldn't be a Spotify Climate Hub if we didn't ask a music question, of course.
Wow.
So I have to ask you, given that we have loads of challenges, but also opportunities ahead, and then you need loads of energy and kind of inspiration. So do you have that one song which makes you get that energy, or it's your like power song? Pernilla, you seem ready to have a go.
No, I think Fanny is a music star here, but well, I think I don't know the lyrics of that song, so maybe it's just completely wrong saying it, but there is a song called Absolutely Everybody, and it's just so like happy, and it feels like everybody can come together and really see this as something to do together as one team. I think that is the song I would go for.
Perfect. Absolutely Everybody. Yeah. Okay. And Fanny?
So I just have plenty of techno songs in my head at the moment, since I'm going to a techno session in a few minutes. But I have one song called Days Without You with Krusen and Satori, which is amazing. It's been on repeat for the last year.
Then it's a good song, because usually you grow tired of something after 2 weeks of intense listening.
I never grow tired of this song.
We'll create a playlist and make sure that everyone can access these as well when they need a little bit more extra inspiration. Well, thanks again for joining us, and good luck in the future, and hopefully, we'll meet again in 50 years and then we have this, solved. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Hannah.